Good evening and welcome to The Proof is Out There. Although famous for its natural beauty, Colorado Springs is also known for its numerous military bases, like the United States Air Force Academy, and its large number of UFO sightings. As our next video will show you, if you want to see something truly unique while visiting the area, I suggest you look up. August 29th, 2021, Colorado Springs, Colorado. Josh Stoner is driving when he spots this in the sky.
That's in the sky right now, everybody.
Two mysterious, somewhat menacing objects hover in the distance. They begin undulating about, independent from one another. In the footage, you can hear Josh's utter confusion, and we understand why.
What the f are those?
Field researcher Ken Gerhardt says these airborne objects move more like something you'd see deep in the ocean.
Whoa, that's crazy. Both of them look like they're alive. It's displaying some tentacles or limbs or something. It actually looks like some type of octopus or squid.
Tentacled creatures from outer space are a common theme in the horror fiction of writers like H.P. Lovecraft. Could it be possible that we are looking at real evidence of interstellar visitors from beyond?
There are actually many reports of what researchers view to be UFOs that are alive. Unidentified flying objects that either look like giant disc-shaped objects made out of flesh, or in some cases, octopus, squid, or jellyfish type of animals that are floating through the air.
Celebrated U.S. astronaut Leland Melvin, who has clocked over 560 hours in space, believes he saw a translucent, curved, organic-looking thing hovering around the payload bay doors during his time on the space shuttle Atlantis in 2009. It's a fascinating theory, but we'd be remiss not to point out the unique area below, which is dotted with military installations and Air Force bases. Could these sites be related to the strange events in the clouds above?
In 2019, the military demonstrated a new type of drone technology. Consisting of microdrones, the drones are a collective organism utilizing one brain for decision-making. And these microdrones actually adapt to each other and interact like a swarm or a hive of individual units.
It was recently reported that the U.S. is developing swarm technology that could be used to thwart a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
If the objective behind this microdrone technology is to confuse the enemy, then what a better alignment than the shape of a giant octopus or squid flying through the air with flowing tentacles.
Scarily enough, it's not just the military that's using advanced drone technology. Several years ago, a drone carrying 6 pounds of methamphetamines crashed on the U.S.-Mexican border. Local authorities said this was hardly the first time this had happened. To find out more about what's in the skies overhead, we turn to our experts. First things first, we checked in with video authenticator Michael Primo to test the legitimacy of this video.
Using some scientific methodology, we can confirm that these objects are in the air and are traveling throughout the air and were being photographed that way based on the natural movements of the camera at that distance.
So it's real. But what is it? Astronomer and video analyst Mark D'Antonio is doubtful that this is some living UFO.
The problem that I have with that theory is that you can see that in some cases, those tentacles separate from the object and come back.
If we zoom into the video, we can see that this may not actually be a solid singular structure.
You would expect the alien entity to be cohesive, and that tells me that these are separate objects, all working in unison with each other.
So are they tiny drones in a drone swarm? D'Antonio says not so fast.
So with a military drone technology, one of the things you would probably expect is that you'll have one leader and the others will follow. But in this particular case, we're watching the leader change every split second. It's changing all the time. You would expect that there would be one cohesive leader with the rest following in a formation. This is too random.
But before we admit that we're stumped, D'Antonio thinks he knows exactly what this is.
We know in nature that this is something we've seen before. A starling is a small bird. In this particular case, we have hundreds and hundreds of them. They're safe, moving in a flock. One becomes a leader 1 second, another becomes a leader another second.
While it still remains somewhat of a mystery, scientists theorize that starlings move like this in order to confuse airborne predators, like the peregrine falcon.
That is something that looks like this octopus in the sky to people who may not know what this is. And it does look very strange, but that's what we're seeing here, a murmuration of starlings.
Our verdict, a murmuration of starlings. This creature looks so otherworldly because it isn't just one creature, it's many. It wasn't micro-drones this time, but given the Space Force installation in Colorado Springs, we're gonna keep our eyes on the skies. We're currently living in the second golden age of UFOs, which obviously means there was a first golden age. It happened in the 1940s and 50s, and one of the most compelling pieces of evidence was a photo of a flying saucer that fascinated and perplexed researchers for decades. But was it a UFO or not? It's around 7:30 p.m. on May 11th, 1950, in McMinnville, Oregon. Evelyn Trent goes out to feed her animals behind the farmhouse she and her husband Paul live in. While attending to her chores, she is astonished by what she sees in the sky. She runs towards the house, yelling for Paul to grab their trusty folding camera. They manage to snap 2 photographs. Both photos show a large, metallic-looking, disc-shaped object hovering in the sky. In one shot, power lines can clearly be seen above and below the object. In another shot, the UFO appears to be trapezoidal in shape, with what looks like an antenna or beacon. Journalist Aaron McCarthy says the Trent photos soon become iconic.
The 1950s were considered the golden age of UFOs for a couple of reasons. In June 1947, we have Kenneth Arnold, a pilot, seeing some really strange UFOs over Mount Rainier. And the media coverage of that gave us the term flying saucer. In July of 1947, we have the crash at Roswell, which really kicked UFO mania into high gear in the United States.
Then, in 1948, a veteran combat pilot, George Gorman, reports an altercation with a speeding, glowing orb from the cockpit of his P-51 Mustang over Fargo, North Dakota. By 1950, the floodgates were open.
So in the midst of all of these things, you have the Trent case.
The Trent photos were first published in 1950. They went on to be circulated and scrutinized in newspapers across the country for more than 2 decades. But in 1976, they'd received their most exhaustive analysis yet, when Bruce Maccabee, an optical physicist for the U.S. Navy, conducted his own examination of the negatives.
Bruce Maccabee determined that they were not tampered with in any way. And he also determined that the line of sight for the 2 photos converged behind the power lines, which in his opinion meant that the object was genuine.
The story of what happened to the original negatives is its own controversy. For some reason, Bruce Maccabee held on to them for 25 years. The family thought they'd been lost. A newspaper later claimed ownership, which prompted an ugly legal battle between the paper and the family over this incredible piece of UFO history. You can only imagine what the UFO community makes of all of this. Let's see if our experts can shed any new light on this age-old mystery. First off, we take the photographs to astrophotography expert Andrew McCarthy. He has his doubts about the authenticity of the images.
There's a few ways you can produce this type of effect in camera. Throwing a hubcap like a frisbee. But I think that would produce motion blur that would be very evident in the photos. There is another way it could be done, however. You could simply tie an object to the power lines and have it dangle there. Using nylon string, it might not be visible, and it would look like the object was floating some distance away. I think the most likely answer here is there was some small object that resembled a craft that was hung from the power lines in this photo.
But what would the family have to gain by staging such an elaborate hoax? Rich Hoffman, the head of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, points out that the Trents never seemed to exploit their photos for financial gain.
There was no intent on trying to make money or selling a story. In fact, their belief was that what they were seeing was something that might have been from the U.S. government, and they were questioning whether they should even talk about it at all.
Hoffman acknowledges that our military, as well as others, was experimenting with various exotic flight technologies at the time, including VTOL vehicles, which stands for Vertical Takeoff and Landing Aircraft.
You have the Abro disc that was created to build like a flying saucer kind of platform, which had a jet engine that was pointing down with a large blade that would help to lift the object up.
Hoffman also points out that one examiner's careful scrutiny of the lines of sight and the relative position of the power lines in each photo eliminates the wire dangling theory.
Dr. Bruce Maccabee said if I stood in this spot and I took this photo, and he drew a line to where that line of sight would be, and then he moves over to the next spot where the object is now seen in a different position when it's tilted up, where the lines would converge at would be beyond the telephone wires, which then indicates that it was not connected to the telephone lines.
Maccabee's analysis proves the two lines of sight don't converge directly under the wires, which is what we'd expect in the case of a hanging model.
So I completely rule out that it's a hoax or anything contrived. And I go with this being a UFO.
Our verdict? We're calling this a genuine UFO, at least for now. The hard math in Hoffman and Maccabee's line of sight analysis seems to blow up McCarthy's power line theory, and a lack of motion blur contradicts any thrown disk theory. The debate proves one thing. While the photos can't be confirmed, they are also quite hard to debunk.
America's most examined
stories, but once we're done, we lock up, and the next day, everything is right where we left it. But we can't say the same for the office we're about to show you. We're in Porto, Portugal, around 2017. It's late at night in the basement office of a completely empty advertising agency. But tonight, someone or something is still here, doing a different kind of business. Look. Security camera footage shows a flickering desk lamp through the doorway of a dark room. Suddenly, the room becomes illuminated. Then out of nowhere, bam! Seconds later, a set of desk drawers goes crazy. Then, the eerie flickering lamp resumes. Journalist Alexis Brooks says at first glance, this looks like the work of a poltergeist.
Poltergeist is a German word that means noisy ghost or noisy spirit.
Most people became familiar with this supernatural being from the 1982 horror film of the same name.
A classic poltergeist situation, you will see doors slamming open and closed, lights going on and off, all of which we saw in this footage.
According to legend, poltergeist can be powerful enough to throw people across rooms and leave visible bite marks. Brooks says the energy of the environment might bring them about.
It's been said that poltergeist activity can actually be produced by extreme emotional effects from a living human being. Could there have been some bad juju going on?
Local legend offers a theory that could be the key to this mystery. Not far from the office was a convent that was home to the last surviving nun from the disbanded Order of the Sal Bento de Ave Maria. It was destroyed to build a train station after her death in the late 1800s, and it's said the nun still seeks revenge against those who brought about her order's extinction.
The question is this nun angry about the demolition of the convent? In certain cultures, the vengeful ghosts are said to be female, so would it be any surprise that this nun roams these halls to this day?
The convent of Sal Bento de Ave Maria was struggling long before the final nun died, and the order was forced to sell its prized silver in the public square. So could the ghost of that angry last nun actually be creating all of this chaos? Let's see if our experts can find the cause of this creepiness. First, physicist Matthew Shadagas analyzes if this could have been seismic activity. Porto is a few hundred miles north of the Gloria Fault, which has triggered several large quakes along the Eurasia-Africa plate boundary.
In the year that this video was allegedly taken, 2017, we don't really have records of any major earthquakes, at least in Portugal. Moreover, some of the effects we're seeing, such as the drawers popping out of the desk right here, seem a bit too localized in order to explain this as a tremor.
Another theory is Porto's coastal tides.
In this area, there are underground springs, which could explain not only what we're seeing in this video, but poltergeist activity claims in general.
In other words, the fast-moving underground water could cause a building's foundation walls and furnishings to shake and shift. But after reviewing the video a few times, Shadakis concludes another explanation is more likely. He notices that the video is telling too perfect a story.
In this video, we have a beginning and an end that refer to each other. We've got the flashing lights, and then at the end, we have that in reverse. That makes for a beautiful visual story. And that's a hint to me that this is a well-choreographed fake video.
What's more, science writer Mick West can demonstrate how this supernatural activity would be easy to reproduce manually with everyday tools.
What I would use for that is just simple fishing line. If you're in just regular office lighting and you're in a relatively low resolution video like you have here, you wouldn't be able to see it. And this can pull quite a lot. I could quite easily pull this drawer open just using some kind of fishing line like I have here.
Another curious detail. The person who gave us this video declined our request for an on-camera interview. So since we couldn't get the person who filmed this clip to admit to staging the action, we may never know the full story. But our verdict is, it's likely a hoax. Our experts say it looks almost too perfect not to be. That said, if you ever find yourself in Porto, head to the Sal Bento station, and you may just catch a glimpse of the ghost of the last nun.
When the truth.
Strange things that have washed up on shore. They often turn out to be sea creatures. But this latest beached object is something else entirely, and it may have a more nefarious purpose. It's February 2023 in the coastal city of Hamamatsu, Japan. Local resident Eihan Katsura has made his way to Inshu Beach to document an unusual object that's washed up on the shore. Eihan's photos and videos reveal a large spherical object embedded in the sand.
そういう大きなものが打ち上がったことが今までなかったものですから、実際どんなものか。
It's almost 5 feet in diameter, made of metal with a light orange hue and darker patches of rust. On the upper right side is a small protruding eyelet hook. Officials surround the sphere wearing protective helmets and masks. Eihan says he just can't fathom how it ended up there.
こんなものがよく流れてきたなというか、かなり多分重たい、動かしたりはしなかったので。
Journalist MJ Banayas explains that given the location, some wonder if it's an explosive device sent by a nearby geopolitical foe.
A month after this orb washed up on the beach in Hamamatsu City, the North Koreans publicly came out and said that they were testing underwater nuclear-armed drones.
And then we found this. In 2016, images were released showing North Korean leader Kim Jong-un standing next to a purported miniaturized nuclear warhead that looks surprisingly like this washed-up object, if just a little bit smaller. Yet, North Korea is not the only regional power Japan is at odds with.
China has an interest in territorial expansion, and Japan is its closest neighbor. So this could be some sort of surveillance device used by the Chinese to monitor underwater traffic or communications cables.
So, maybe this is a giant spy tool. During the Cold War, the U.S. Navy used vehicles similar in shape to this one to help eavesdrop on the Soviets. In what was known as Operation Ivy Bells, they wrapped a recording device around an undersea cable. But there's another possibility that's even more exotic.
This could be what's called a USO, or an unidentified submersible object. Some people believe that this resembles an object that was recorded by the USS Omaha in the Pacific, basically a round object that crashed into the ocean.
Sightings of USOs are less common than reports of UFOs. But U.S. Navy experts say unidentified submerged objects pose a much greater threat to naval vessels than flying ones. Maybe that's why those Japanese investigators first approached this washed-up orb in protective gear. Their initial examination yielded a few answers. Let's see what our experts can find out. Military analyst Tim McMillan considers whether this object could be an advanced piece of equipment used for deep-sea espionage or surveillance.
Based on the degree of rust on it, this object is most likely iron, possibly steel. That's not really a material that you would see used in any type of underwater espionage, because it would be something that would be highly susceptible to oxidation. And obviously, if you're sneaking in a listening device, this is not something you're going to want to keep going back and forth to repair and fix.
So if this isn't a surveillance device, then could it be a weapon of war from somewhere like North Korea?
North Korea is often involved in all sorts of claims of having weapons capable of delivering nuclear explosions, one of which, at least is claimed, to be possibly shaped similar to the object we're seeing here in this image. If that was the case, this would just be the warhead component of whatever that is. And I would hardly call it a successful nuclear device if the warhead has separated from the delivery system. We don't have a boom.
Just to be sure, officials eventually x-rayed this mysterious object and discovered that it's hollow, without any explosives inside. So could this actually be a USO created using a sophisticated alien cloaking technology? Again, McMillan says its iron or steel composition suggests otherwise.
It's a very durable material, but it's a very heavy material, and it corrodes rather quickly in underwater or saltwater environments. And so it's not going to be a material that's conducive, really, for any type of exotic extraterrestrial craft.
Archaeologist Ed Barnhart believes this object's exterior design provides the clue to its prosaic purpose.
There's really no distinguishing features on its surface except for two little eyelets, things that look like they could attach a rope or a chain. It now takes a shape that's very well known, and that is mooring buoy. They're these big metal balls that have chains that link them to anchors at the bottom of a deep spot of the ocean.
Our verdict, this is a mooring buoy that was likely floating out far at sea when it got loose from the chain attaching it to a heavy anchor at the ocean floor. That freed the buoy to drift to the shores of Japan. Australia is home to so many deadly creatures is due to the fact that it's an isolated continent, one that's been drifting through the ocean since breaking off from Antarctica 30 million years ago. It's become a magnet for all forms of resilient species, creating a pretty monstrous ecosystem, as two fishermen found out the hard way. February 2019, Kakadu National Park in Australia. Andrew Rose and T. Hoken are fishing in the Mary River when all of a sudden Andrew's line begins acting strangely. He pulls it from the water, and the friends discover this.
It was certainly a shock. The creature itself, I'd never seen anything like it. No eyes, sharp teeth. Yeah, it was about 6 inches long.
The creature was not hooked in the lure, but rather wrapped itself around it. Andrew made sure to keep his distance as the pair snapped pictures of the strange creature before releasing it back into the Mary River.
We didn't know whether it was going to be toxic or what. I don't know if it's going to bite me, poison me, kill me.
Considering the variety of deadly animals that populate Australia, Andrew was wise not to get too friendly with the unknown creature despite its diminutive stature. I mean, this is the home of the Irukandji jellyfish, who at only 2 centimeters long still has a venom 100 times more powerful than a cobra. As for this thing, we had to ask field researcher Ken Gerhardt. He says the key to what it is might be where it is.
Where this weird creature was captured is actually in the Mary River in northern Australia. And this is the home to a legendary creature known as the Mary River gharial, a serpentine animal with a very long, skinny head that's shaped like a crocodilian, a long body with 4 paddles, and a long tail. Could this be a juvenile version of the Mary River gharial, perhaps in its larval stage?
In the late 1800s, new settlers to this area were told stories by the local Aboriginals about the monstrous gharial that frequently attacked their women and children. And over the next century, the giant gharial would be reported for overturning boats in the water.
In the 1980s, a local fisherman actually claimed that his boat was rammed by the Mary River gharial.
Gerhard also explores a more practical theory.
There's also a possibility that what we could be dealing with here is some type of mutated animal. A 2014 expose revealed that rapid industrialization in neighboring Indonesia has led to massive amounts of toxins and pollution being dumped into the river systems. The appearance of strange and grotesque creatures like this one could be an indicator of how bad the situation is getting.
Genetic mutations from toxic environments are nothing new on this show. In the past, we showed you a mutant two-headed snake that our experts said could very well have been caused by industrial pollution. Is that what spawned this alien-like creature? To find out, we turn to our experts. We first sit down with marine biologist Dr. Shay Steingass to discuss the idea that this mysterious creature is the product of pollution from Indonesia, a theory she finds flawed.
The Mary River flows to the sea, and while we may see off-flow of pollutants like fertilizers or chemicals that make their way through this system, oftentimes the impacts of these chemicals end up in the ocean itself because that's where the rivers drain to. So the effects that we would see from those pollutants would probably be offshore and not so much in the animals here.
So then what about the earlier theory that this tiny terror could somehow be related to the legendary Mary River gharial?
Those were prehistoric crocodiles that had paddle-like limbs, but we don't see any kind of limbs on this animal. So this is not a gharial. Rather, this is very clearly a mud-dwelling fish. The fact that it can't see means that it lives in the sediment or under the mud where eyesight really isn't even an asset, it's a liability.
We followed up with biologist Floyd Hayes, who said he can identify not only the type of fish, but the exact species.
You could identify it by the odd-shaped head, and the eyes are covered with skin, and it has a lot of weird bumps and skin folds on the head, and also has a elongated body. So this appears to be a species of worm goby of the genus Tanioides. There are about 13 or 14 species that live in the Indo-Pacific area.
Our experts concur. What we are looking at here is a mud-dwelling fish known as the worm goby. And while it might not be as dangerous as we first thought, I'd still suggest keeping your hands inside the boat while traveling down an Australian. Elephants might never forget, but they also never talk, right? I mean, we all remember Dumbo, but hang on. Over in Asia, there is a loquacious pachyderm who's got something to say. So listen up. 2012, just outside Seoul, South Korea, sits Everland, the country's largest theme park. Large enough, in fact, that it houses a whole zoo. Within that zoo, 22-year-old Kashik, a young male Asian elephant, is being recorded in a large room. He is a marvel to look at, towering over his handler by several feet. But if we listen closely, it's clear he's even more amazing to hear. Off-screen, his handler tells Kashik, "Jua," good in Korean.
Wow.
Kashik paces a bit and then raises his trunk to his mouth, and according to some, repeats the phrase back. Let's hear that again.
Wow.
Kashik allegedly knows 6 words, all in Korean, and uses them with regularity.
This clip of Kashik the elephant started circulating in 2006, and it kind of set the world on fire. Kashik was able to speak in Korean. Hello, good, down, lie down, and no.
Wow.
Scientists ran a study, and Korean speakers could actually identify what Kashik was saying. very smart elephant, but all elephants are smart.
Elephants actually have the largest brain of any land animal and are thought to equal dolphins in terms of problem-solving capability. Nature philosophers like Pliny the Elder believed they were even smart enough to create their own religion.
Pliny thought that elephants actually participated in religious activities because they would wave sticks at and bathe during certain phases of the moon. They exhibit ritual behavior. Elephants will actually stroke the bodies of the dead members of their herd, and they will sit with the bodies for quite some time.
According to journalist Aaron McCarthy, the old expression, "an elephant never forgets," is actually quite accurate. Some say these thought-provoking pachyderms are even known to hold a grudge. One instance involves an Indian woman who was rumored to have assisted elephant poachers.
In 2022, a 70-year-old woman in India was trampled by an elephant. According to some reports, the woman had actually been part of a group that had thrown rocks at the elephant in order to take her baby away. She later died of her injuries. At her funeral, it was reported that that same elephant came back and actually trampled her body again, which some have suggested means the elephant was holding a grudge and even seeking revenge.
So does this sophisticated behavior mean elephants can learn to talk? Or are these sounds possibly some strange coincidence?
Elephants communicate with each other with a number of sounds and vocalizations. Some have actually wondered, have they evolved to develop a language to communicate with us?
According to ancient Indonesian legend, the orangutan actually can speak, but chooses not to out of fear that humans would enslave him. Could the same be true of the elephant? Our experts aren't working for peanuts, so let's see what they have to say. Forensic sound analyst Rob Maher says first things first. What we are hearing is not actual talking, but whistling.
When we speak normally, we have air pressure from our diaphragm in our lungs, and in our glottis we have vocal folds or vocal cords, and the air that's being forced between them vibrates. Now, a whistle is not involving the glottis. It's in the upper part of our mouth. A person can either just use their lips and blow or use their fingers. But apparently, this elephant is able to use the shape of the trunk in such a way to create these whistling sounds. And so we are able to interpret this interesting whistly sound as if it's an actual word.
Biologist Stephanie Menke doesn't question Kaushik's advanced intelligence, but Menke is skeptical that what we are seeing here is a real-life talking elephant.
Elephants vocalize a lot with each other. Typically, their sounds are infrasonic, which means that they are below the level of human hearing. And this elephant created these sounds so that we could hear them and probably looked for the human reaction. Most likely, it is mimicking words that have been said by the trainer.
In fact, Asian and African elephants have both been documented mimicking a variety of sounds, including crickets and truck engines. A peek into Kaushik's past may reveal what motivated him to create these sounds.
Kaushik was separated from the rest of his herd at age 5. He was alone for a long part of his youth. Elephants are very social creatures. I do think that this elephant was trying to mimic sounds that it heard of other humans saying to each other to get attention.
Our verdict? We're calling this a case of mimicry and bonding. Kaushik is one smart elephant, but he's not fluent in Korean smart. He doesn't know the sound Joa means good, but he does know it creates a good connection with the humans around him. And hopefully he gets the love and attention an elephant of his intellect deserves. You've probably heard of Earth's polar vortices. They are large swaths of cold winds that circle around both of the poles. Here, they're shaped pretty organically with a swirling motion. But look just a billion miles away, give or take, and you'll find that Saturn has its own polar vortex. And the one in the north sure looks like it was designed purposely by something intelligent. It's 2007, above the northern hemisphere of Saturn. The Cassini spacecraft is beaming data back to Earth, showing a glimpse of Saturn's northern hemisphere. But what's that almost perfectly equilateral polygon there, above the North Pole? British planetary scientist Lee Fletcher was amazed when he first observed this shape for himself.
When the hexagon jumped out at me, I was gobsmacked. The question of what caused that is one that still holds a lot of mystery.
Take another look. Saturn is known for its rings, but this hexagon is really bizarre. No other planet has anything like it. Science writer Amy Tidal says Lee was the first to see the hexagon during Saturn's long winter, but it's been mystifying scientists for years.
This hexagon shape on Saturn's North Pole was first discovered by the Voyager satellites in the 1980s, so it's been present on Saturn for decades.
What's strange is it seems to have changed color from blue to gold, and it appears much larger than originally thought. So why is it here? To some, it's evidence of a spiritual belief known as sacred geometry.
Sacred geometry is the idea that certain shapes and patterns appear like that for a reason. According to sacred geometry, the hexagon represents a potential for life. One of the most sacred shapes is the flower of life, which is a shape created of 19 identical overlapping circles. We see this going back as far as the ancient Hindu and Christian cultures.
But what or who could have created this seemingly deliberate form above Saturn? Author Jason Martell has an idea.
We know that humans are capable of weather manipulation, such as cloud seeding. It's very possible that aliens would have similar technology. This hexagonal vortex could be some type of delivery mechanism for the potential of life.
Think about that perfect monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey. It wasn't just a cool geometric artifact. It was a mechanism for advancing intelligent life. Could this sacred hexagon be something similar? It sounds like a stretch, but some think life may already be advancing near Saturn.
Saturn's moon Titan is one of the most interesting places for a lot of people to look for life because it's chemically very similar to early Earth, and it's got a lot of the things that we think life needs to thrive.
The hexagonal formation could actually be a key to unlocking secrets of the universe.
Mathematicians say the hexagon is nature's most efficient shape. With mechanically balanced angles at 120 degrees each, it can hold the most weight with the least amount of material. But is Saturn's hexagonal vortex proof that there is more to this shape? Our experts explore all the angles.
This hexagonal shape isn't actually visible on any of the other planets in our solar system. It's truly unique to Saturn. It's almost like a snowflake in its precision and its beauty.
So it is unique. But is that proof it's the result of intelligent design?
That hexagon looks like it's something that might have been created artificially, but this is a natural resonance that's based on the way the bands on Saturn operate and the way the atmospheric currents flow.
And NASA geologist Dr. Bob Anderson thinks he can explain how and why it was created.
This atmosphere is a fluid of gas. And so as it's rotating, it has what's called surface tension between the particles. When two particles rub against each other, they have like a tension to them. The hexagon shape will fall out when fluids of different densities flow past each other. And when they harden, they form a hexagon shape because it's the most efficient way to get into a stable configuration when you're using gas and liquids. In order to get this hexagon there, all the conditions have to be right.
But how could the perfect conditions last for decades?
These structures are so ingrained into the atmosphere that they remain very constant. A perfect example is Jupiter. The Great Red Spot has been seen since around the time of Galileo.
And why has the hexagon changed colors since the end of 2012? Planetary scientist Lee Fletcher says the key is understanding that it takes more than 7 Earth years for seasons to change on Saturn.
As sunlight returns to those springtime northern latitudes, you get these smoggy particles being created by chemistry high up within the atmosphere that started to fill in the center of the hexagon and making it appear gone.
It was a crisp spring evening in 1950 when the small town of McMinnville, Oregon, seemed to pause under the soft amber glow of the setting sun, the fields stretching into a haze of green and gold, And yet, for the Trents, it was just another ordinary night on their farm, a routine measured by the lowing of cows and the hum of the old windmill turning lazily in the breeze. Paul Trent had spent the day repairing fences, his hands rough and scratched from weathered wood and stubborn nails, while his wife, Evelyn, tended the vegetable garden, the scent of freshly tilled earth mingling with the faint aroma of cut grass, an ordinary domestic symphony, unbroken until Paul stepped out near the edge of the property to call the livestock in for the evening. It was then, seemingly without warning, that his eyes caught something unusual hovering above the distant fields, a glimmering shape, metallic and silent, reflecting the dying light of the sun in an almost otherworldly manner. He squinted, trying to convince himself it was nothing more than a passing aircraft or a trick of the clouds, but there was an almost magnetic quality to the object, a slow deliberate motion that drew the gaze, compelling and unnatural. "Evelyn," he called, his voice taut with disbelief, "come look at this." And so, she emerged from the garden, wiping her hands on her apron, and followed his pointing finger, her eyes widening at the sight, a disc-shaped object, hovering and rotating gently, as if inspecting the land below with quiet intent. It was unlike any plane or weather balloon either had ever seen, and the subtle hum, almost imperceptible yet distinctly mechanical, resonated through the air and into their bones. Paul grabbed his camera, an old but reliable model he'd used for farm records and family snapshots, and rushed to capture the moment, hands trembling, heart hammering with both fear and fascination. The shutter clicked twice, each frame freezing the unearthly visitor against the pastel sky, the object's edges reflecting the last blush of sunset in a surreal halo. The photographs, innocent at first glance, would later become an enigma that baffled experts, fueled speculation, and gave rise to a story that would ripple across decades. But in that instant, they were simply two humans witnessing something inexplicable, caught between awe and terror. Yet even as they watched, the object began to drift slowly upward, its movement deliberate, controlled, almost sentient, and Evelyn felt a shiver run down her spine, a sense that they were not alone in the universe in a way that transcended imagination. That night, over a dinner of potatoes and roast, they could not shake the feeling that reality had stretched, however briefly, into something unknown, the conversation revolving around hushed wonder and cautious speculation. By the following morning, the story had begun to take root in the town, whispers carried by neighbors and local grocers, and though some dismissed it as a trick of light or the imagination of two overworked farmers, others, with eyes wide and skeptical curiosity, demanded answers that no one seemed able to provide. In the days that followed, Paul and Evelyn were visited by reporters and curious townspeople, their farm temporarily transformed into a hub of bewilderment and fascination, the camera and the negatives becoming silent witnesses to a phenomenon that defied explanation. But it was not only human curiosity that stirred. Deep in the shadows of government offices, in dimly lit rooms filled with the scent of tobacco and the weight of classified folders, whispers of the McMinnville sighting had reached ears accustomed to dismissing such stories, yet in this case, even seasoned investigators found themselves intrigued, a sense of unease creeping into the meticulous precision of intelligence work. Reports were filed, memos exchanged, photographs scrutinized under magnification, and while no consensus emerged, the event began to develop its own gravity, pulling not only scientists and journalists but also amateur enthusiasts and the genuinely curious into the orbit of a mystery that refused to dissipate. By midweek, Paul had received an unexpected visit from a young man claiming to be a researcher for a national UFO study group, a thin, intense figure named Richard Halsey, whose eyes betrayed a mixture of reverence and obsession as he peered at the photographs. "You realize," Halsey said, almost in a whisper, leaning close to examine the negatives under a small hand lamp, that these images could be some of the most significant evidence of extraterrestrial visitation ever documented. Paul, still skeptical despite the surreal events, nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the words yet unsure whether to feel pride, fear, or disbelief. Evelyn, sitting quietly in the kitchen, stirred her tea, sensing the gravity but also the danger inherent in attracting attention from strangers, especially ones whose intent seemed both genuine and obsessive. As Halsey departed, promising to return with experts and equipment to study the site, Paul felt a subtle shift in the air, an unspoken acknowledgement that life, as he had known it, would never be entirely ordinary again. That night, sleep came fitfully, haunted by visions of glowing discs and the unanswerable question of whether what they had seen was alone or part of a broader, unseen presence, a question that would grow more pressing as the weeks turned into months. Local newspapers ran brief accounts, often tinged with skepticism, yet the photographs themselves, when published, sparked debates that reached beyond McMinnville, reaching offices and homes across the country, compelling even hardened scientists to reconsider assumptions about the limits of human perception and the possibility of non-terrestrial intelligence. In parallel, a subtle undercurrent of paranoia began to flow through the town, as neighbors debated the authenticity of the images, some speculating that the trends were part of a hoax, others convinced that the photographs revealed a truth far larger than their rural community could comprehend. This mixture of awe and suspicion created a delicate tension, a social fabric stretched thin by the unknown, with Paul and Evelyn caught at the center, their daily routines now punctuated by the footsteps of strangers, the flash of cameras, and the persistent questions that sought to unravel what had been frozen in 2 frames of film. Amidst this unfolding drama, another presence began to make itself known, subtle and enigmatic, shadows at the edge of vision, flickers of light in places where no light should be, a feeling that someone, or something, was observing, studying the observers, as if the event had opened a conduit not only to the skies but to the hidden layers of reality that lay beyond perception. One evening, as Paul stepped out to check the barn, he noticed a figure standing at the edge of the orchard, impossibly still, watching. The figure disappeared when he called out, leaving behind only the feeling of being studied, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. Evelyn, too, reported dreams that were impossibly vivid, of traveling through starry corridors, of floating above the earth in a metallic craft that seemed alive, guided by consciousness rather than machinery, dreams that lingered long after waking, leaving her both exhilarated and terrified. As the town debated, scientists analyzed, and strangers arrived, the trends became unwilling chroniclers of an event that spanned the boundaries between ordinary life and the paranormal, their farmhouse a locus where the impossible touched the mundane. It was during this period that Paul began keeping a journal, recording not only what he saw with his eyes but also the subtle changes in atmosphere, the strange animal behaviors, the sudden silences in the fields, the inexplicable sounds that seemed to emanate from nowhere, as though the landscape itself had been altered, subtly, by the presence of the unknown. The journal entries, at first practical and descriptive, slowly became tinged with speculation. With a tentative theory emerging that whatever had visited McMinnville that evening might not be constrained to a single appearance, might have a purpose or intelligence that humans could not yet grasp. As spring melted into early summer, the objects seemed to linger in the consciousness of the town, and not only through photographs, unexplained radar blips were reported at the nearby airfield, fleeting shapes were glimpsed in the skies by other farmers, and a sense of expectancy settled over the hills, a quiet, almost religious tension that spoke of something larger than the community, larger than the country, larger than comprehension. Halsey returned, accompanied by 2 other researchers, a physicist and a photographer, and together they combed the fields, measured angles, scrutinized light, and debated the plausibility of reflection, lens flare, or trick photography, but even in the sterile logic of their instruments, something stubbornly defied explanation, as if the photographs contained more than mere images, they contained a question, a challenge to human understanding. The evenings became meetings of whispered theories and quiet conjecture, as neighbors gathered to recount what they saw that night, embellishing some details unconsciously, omitting others, and in the process creating a tapestry of narrative that mixed memory, imagination, and fact. The trance, meanwhile, began to feel the weight of responsibility, realizing that the photographs were no longer just family mementos but pieces of evidence, keys to a puzzle that could alter the very conception of reality. And in the background, a persistent unease grew, a sense that being seen had consequences, that the act of observation might itself invite attention, a subtle but undeniable impression that their lives, once simple and predictable, had become intertwined with forces they could not name, forces that might watch, guide, or even manipulate events in ways beyond comprehension, a thought that was thrilling, terrifying, and irresistible all at once. The days following the arrival of Halsey and his team became a blur of observation, measurement, and speculation. The Trent's farmhouse transformed into a temporary command center, strewn with equipment, notebooks, and a constant hum of debate as the researchers tried to reconcile the impossible with the known, while Evelyn found herself alternately fascinated and unnerved by the meticulous attention to their property, the quiet probing of their daily routines, and the way Halsey's eyes seemed to linger on corners of the farmhouse as if sensing something that could not be seen by ordinary means. Paul, meanwhile, ventured into the fields at dawn, camera slung around his neck, noting the subtle changes in animal behavior, the way the cows seemed uneasy at particular spots, the sudden flutter of birds in patterns too precise to be random, and the faint but persistent vibrations that sometimes hummed beneath the soil as though the ground itself were aware, recording every anomaly. In his journal, as if cataloguing a natural history of the extraordinary, his mind simultaneously rational and haunted, aware that the photographs captured only a fraction of a broader truth he could feel but not yet name. Halsey spent hours with the negatives under magnification, tracing contours and reflections, arguing with the physicist, Dr. Linden, about the plausibility of lens artifacts versus solid form, while the photographer, a meticulous man named Clark, rephotographed the negatives under various filters, the results only deepening the mystery, highlighting subtle iridescence along the edges of the craft that no known material could explain, an effect that seemed to shift slightly depending on the angle of light, almost as though the object were interacting with photons in a manner inconsistent with terrestrial physics. At night, the farmhouse was a different kind of stage. Evelyn would sit at the kitchen table, the lamp casting long shadows across her face, feeling an almost psychic presence in the room, small movements in the corner of her vision that vanished when she turned, soft whispers on the wind that might have been memory or imagination, while Paul and the researchers pored over the day's findings, their voices a mixture of frustration, awe, and quiet reverence, as if acknowledging that reality itself had been stretched and rearranged in the span of a single photograph. One evening, as the sunset bled orange and violet across the horizon, Paul noticed a strange glow emanating from the orchard, faint but steady, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to echo the low hum he had first heard on the night of the sighting. When he stepped closer, the light coalesced into a translucent shimmer, almost like heat waves over asphalt, but with a definitive shape, hovering just above the ground, and then, without warning, it shot upward, vanishing into the twilight sky with a speed and precision that defied explanation, leaving Paul staring in disbelief, unsure whether he had witnessed a recurrence or a trick of the evening air. Evelyn, informed of the sighting, shivered at the idea of their farm as a locus, a point of contact between the known and the unknown, and she began to notice patterns in her dreams that mirrored the day's events, corridors of light, metallic chambers filled with instruments whose function she could not comprehend, and beings whose gaze seemed both curious and infinite, watching her from across dimensions she could not describe, sensations that lingered long after awakening, leaving her with the unmistakable sense that her consciousness had touched something beyond the ordinary world. The researchers became increasingly engrossed, setting up motion sensors, electromagnetic detectors, and improvised observation stations around the property, each device designed to capture evidence of anomalies invisible to the naked eye. Their instruments began to record strange readings, brief electromagnetic surges, inexplicable shadows, and minute temperature fluctuations, none of which correlated with natural phenomena, and The cumulative data only intensified the sense that McMinnville had become a magnet for something unknown, a focus of attention from forces or intelligences far beyond human comprehension. Local townspeople were drawn into the web of curiosity and suspicion, a mixture of skeptics and believers, reporters and neighbors, each interpreting events through their own lens, some claiming to see strange lights moving along the horizon in the early evening, others insisting that the trends were fabricating evidence for attention, yet all contributing to the palpable tension that hung over the region. A community slowly awakening to the possibility that the universe was far stranger and more intricate than their everyday lives suggested. Among the visitors was a young journalist named Marian Collins, whose interest went beyond sensationalism. She possessed an uncanny ability to connect patterns, to notice the inconsistencies in testimony, and to sense the emotional undercurrents that sometimes revealed truths hidden from plain sight. Collins spent nights with the trends, poring over journals and photographs, listening to Evelyn recount vivid dreams and Paul describe fleeting lights, and she began to theorize that the phenomenon might be more than mere physical manifestations, perhaps bridging human consciousness and some alien awareness, a theory both thrilling and terrifying, and one she kept cautiously to herself until she could gather corroborating observations. As the investigation deepened, so too did the subtle intrusions of the paranormal. Objects in the farmhouse occasionally moved without explanation. A cold presence was sometimes felt in rooms that had been empty for hours, and a soft, melodic hum, audible only in fleeting moments, seemed to emanate from the night sky, reverberating through bones, hinting at intelligence and purpose beyond human reckoning. In one particularly unsettling episode, Clark, the photographer, awoke in the middle of the night to see a faint silhouette moving outside the window, distinctly humanoid but taller than any person he had known, with a head that seemed slightly elongated and eyes that shimmered faintly in the darkness. When he blinked, it was gone, leaving only the imprint of fear, curiosity, and fascination that would haunt him long after he returned to the farmhouse interior. Paul and Evelyn, increasingly aware of the psychological weight of these experiences, began implementing routines to ground themselves, early morning walks through the fields, shared meals at the kitchen table, keeping journals and sketches meticulously, yet even these measures could not fully insulate them from the pervasive sense of being observed, as if the photographs had not simply captured a moment in time but opened a threshold, a window through which something intelligent and unknowable had begun to watch, study, and perhaps even interact with them. Halsey's fascination bordered on obsession, his notes thickening with speculation about energy fields, gravitational anomalies, and the possibility that the object, whatever its origin, was capable of manipulating perception, space, or time itself. His conversation often drifted into what seemed speculative science fiction, yet under the intense scrutiny of the other researchers, some patterns began to emerge, subtle but undeniable, that hinted at phenomena that could not easily be explained away. As word of the sighting and the subsequent investigation spread, governmental interest subtly increased. Unmarked cars were occasionally seen near the outskirts of McMinnville, plainclothesmen asking questions with polite persistence, recording details with clipboards and cameras, leaving Paul and Evelyn with a lingering sense of unease, a realization that the world beyond their farm had taken notice and that their lives, once private and predictable, were now entwined with forces both bureaucratic and cosmic. The trends became adept at balancing normalcy with vigilance, hosting visitors while remaining alert to subtle cues in the environment, noticing patterns of light, temperature, and sound that suggested the recurrence of the phenomenon might be cyclical, as though whatever had appeared that spring evening might return at intervals dictated by motives and measures entirely alien to human understanding. Evelyn began experimenting with lucid dream techniques, hoping to interact consciously with the visions that visited her in sleep, while Paul constructed a makeshift observatory in the barn, lining it with lenses and reflective surfaces in an effort to capture fleeting glimpses of light or motion, their efforts a combination of science, intuition, and desperate hope that they might establish some form of communication or understanding. Marian Collins observed these experiments with careful detachment, documenting every detail, noting inconsistencies and anomalies, and gradually she became convinced that McMinnville was not merely the site of a single incident but a focal point of broader phenomena that might connect with other sightings across the country and perhaps the globe, her mind tracing patterns invisible to the casual observer, assembling a map of possible occurrences that hinted at intelligence, intent, and design behind what might otherwise appear as random events. One late evening, as shadows stretched across the orchard and the researchers analyzed data from a series of newly installed motion sensors, a sudden pulse of light erupted in the sky above the property, brighter and more defined than anything previously observed, moving with a precision and awareness that defied earthly physics. Paul and Evelyn froze, hearts hammering, while Halsey whispered urgently about the implications. Dr. Linden murmured about electromagnetic anomalies, and Collins instinctively raised her camera, capturing the event in real time, the image likely to become yet another piece of evidence that would fuel speculation, debate, and wonder. The object hovered momentarily, suspended as if evaluating the observers below, and then with a sudden, deliberate motion, it vanished into the ether, leaving only the lingering hum, a faint glow fading from the night, and a sense of interconnectedness with something vast, intelligent, and unknowable. In the quiet aftermath, the group reconvened inside the farmhouse, tension coiling like a living thing, awareness that their lives had irrevocably changed, that the photographs were only the beginning, and that the McMinnville UFO was not merely a curiosity but an entry point into mysteries that span the intersection of science, consciousness, and the paranormal, forces that would continue to beckon them into investigation, speculation, and perhaps a confrontation with truths the human mind was only beginning to glimpse, setting the stage for encounters and revelations that would extend far beyond the fields and orchards of their small Oregon town. The weeks that followed seemed to stretch time into a strange elasticity, days and nights blending as the trends and the visiting team of researchers settled into a rhythm dictated by anticipation and subtle dread. The farm no longer simply a place of ordinary labor but a theater where the boundaries of reality were being tested, every sound, shadow, and flicker of light carrying the weight of unasked questions. Paul kept vigilant, walking the perimeter of the property at dawn and dusk, noting subtle anomalies in the fields, areas where grass grew oddly tall and green, spots where soil appeared compacted without explanation, and faint impressions that resembled tracks, though not those of any animal familiar to him, while Evelyn's dreams grew more vivid, increasingly populated by metallic corridors, soft glowing beings, and images of the earth seen from impossible angles, the sensations leaving her disoriented but compelled to record every detail in painstaking sketches and journal entries, a personal atlas of the otherworldly. Halsey, increasingly consumed by the potential significance of the McMinnville sighting, began theorizing about energy fields surrounding the farm, correlating data from electromagnetic sensors with Paul's observations of unexplained light patterns, and even proposing a radical hypothesis that consciousness itself might act as a beacon, drawing attention from entities capable of traversing the boundaries of space and time, a notion that the more scientifically minded Dr. Linden received with cautious skepticism yet could not entirely dismiss due to the consistency of the anomalies. Clark, ever meticulous, captured hundreds of photographs of the skies, fields, and night phenomena, many of which revealed subtle distortions, fleeting lights, or blurred shapes that seemed to defy explanation, each new image intensifying the sense of an active presence, a consciousness engaging not just with the land but with the minds of those observing it, a silent dialogue that hinted at intelligence beyond comprehension. Local attention waxed and waned as reports of the sighting and ongoing investigations filtered through newspapers, radio broadcasts, and word of mouth, creating a mixture of fascination, skepticism, and unease within McMinnville and neighboring towns. Some neighbors offered support, sharing personal accounts of strange lights or sounds, while others whispered accusations of deceit or sensationalism. The social dynamics of the community reflecting the larger tension between belief, denial, and the human need to interpret the inexplicable. One afternoon, as the sun glinted off the metal roof of the barn, Paul noticed a strange pattern in the clouds above the orchard, a series of formations that seemed too deliberate, aligned almost geometrically, and when Evelyn joined him, she instinctively traced shapes with her fingers, the contours mirroring some of the forms from her dreams, an eerie overlap of imagination and reality that left both of them silent and unsettled. Halsey proposed a night observation session, arranging cameras, tripods, and an array of electromagnetic detectors, the team preparing to record anything that might recur, while Collins stayed back in the farmhouse, cataloging journals, sketches, and photographs, attempting to construct a narrative that bridged tangible evidence and subjective experience, her mind working to find coherence in the patterns emerging across different layers of observation. As darkness fell, a profound quiet enveloped the farm, broken only by the occasional call of an owl or the rustle of leaves, and then, as if cued by some unseen signal, the air seemed to thicken, charged with an unnameable energy, the sensors flickering in response, and faint lights appeared in the orchard, moving deliberately yet without sound, reflecting colors that shifted subtly in ways that made it difficult to discern material substance from spectral projection. Paul and Evelyn watched in awe and fear, hearts pounding, as Halsey and Dr. Linden examined readings that suggested local gravitational anomalies, energy pulses, and slight distortions of space-time, data that challenged fundamental principles of physics, while Collins, snapping photographs and taking notes, felt an almost psychic resonance in the air, an impression that the beings responsible for the lights were aware of their observation, that consciousness and perception were being monitored, tested, and perhaps even influenced. Suddenly, the lights coalesced into a singular form, a shape reminiscent of the original disk captured in the trend photographs, hovering low and rotating slowly as if inspecting the earth, and a collective hush fell over the group, the gravity of the moment intensified by the realization that this was not a repetition but a continuation, an extension of the event that had first occurred months before, now interacting with observers in a manner both deliberate and intimate. Evelyn felt a tug at the edge of her consciousness, a subtle pull that she could not resist, and for a moment, the boundaries between self and phenomenon blurred. Images from her dreams overlapped with reality, corridors of light merging with the orchard, soft voices, almost musical, brushing against her awareness, offering no words but a sense of intention, curiosity, and gentle authority. Halsey, usually the most grounded in practical investigation, whispered about interdimensional theory, about the possibility that the object, or beings behind it, operated within a plane not entirely accessible to ordinary perception, that the photographs, the lights, and the psychic impressions were all threads of the same tapestry, evidence of interaction that transcended material constraints. As the night deepened, subtle events unfolded that challenged every expectation. The barn door, secured earlier, creaked open with no human intervention, shadows elongated and shifted in impossible ways, and faint, rhythmic pulses emanated from the soil, detectable through instruments yet felt more vividly in the chest and mind, a resonance that seemed to echo the presence of life not confined to organic form. Marian Collins, notebook trembling in hand, documented everything, aware that conventional science might dismiss her observations as subjective or anecdotal, yet certain that the convergence of events demanded serious consideration, that the McMinnville phenomenon was not isolated but a focal point of broader phenomena intersecting the tangible and intangible, observable and psychic. In the following days, the farm became a nexus of overlapping realities, where dreams, visions, and instruments spoke in parallel, reinforcing the notion that human perception alone was insufficient to grasp the full scope of what was occurring, and Paul began experimenting with meditative observation, sitting quietly in the orchard at dawn, attempting to attune himself to the subtle signals and patterns he had noted in animal behavior, light anomalies, and auditory impressions, hoping to bridge conscious awareness with the latent intelligence he sensed in the surroundings. Evelyn, increasingly comfortable navigating the liminal spaces between dreams and waking awareness, began to interpret recurring motifs, spirals, luminous paths, and concentric circles that appeared both in her sketches and in aerial photographs, leading her to speculate that the phenomenon might be communicating through geometry, resonance, or other nonverbal means. A silent intelligence shaping experience according to principles human minds were only beginning to apprehend. Halsey's obsession deepened, his discussions with Dr. Linden moving from conventional measurement into abstract theorization, considering possibilities of matter-energy manipulation, consciousness coupling, and the emergence of perceptual feedback loops in which observers were not merely recording but participating in phenomena, co-creating a dynamic interplay between mind, matter, and unknown intelligence. Clark, meanwhile, tirelessly captured images, the repeated exposure of the night sky revealing subtle anomalies, orbs, and ephemeral streaks of light that suggested patterns too consistent to be random, and in one startling moment, a shadow passed over the group on the ground in perfect synchronicity with a visual distortion above, as if the unseen entity were acknowledging observation, leaving a resonance of presence that was felt more than seen. The town of McMinnville, meanwhile, was a subtle echo chamber for the unfolding drama, neighbors gossiping about flashes in the sky, questioning the trend's sanity, or reporting minor disturbances that matched patterns of light and sound described by the researchers, the local community unconsciously participating in a tapestry of observation, speculation, and the uncanny, their lives intersecting with events they could not fully comprehend, yet felt compelled to notice. Late one night, a sudden surge in electromagnetic readings coincided with an unearthly sound, a tone resonating deeply in the chest, harmonizing with pulses in the instruments, and for a fleeting moment, the group felt that the barrier between dimensions had thinned, that the object, or consciousness behind it, was partially visible, partially perceptible, communicating not in words but through pattern, sensation, and shared perception. Paul's journal entries from that night reveal a mix of awe, trepidation, and clarity. He describes understanding that the McMinnville sighting was not a singular event but a gateway, a continuing interaction between human perception and intelligence far beyond terrestrial experience, that the photographs were not merely images but invitations to awareness, and that the ordinary rhythms of farm life had been irrevocably interwoven with a larger, hidden fabric of reality. Evelyn, reflecting in her own handwriting, recounts visions of luminous beings descending and ascending, observing without fear, testing the boundaries of understanding, guiding and revealing without interference, and she recognizes that the interplay between dreams, observation, and psychic impressions forms a consistent narrative thread, one that points to conscious intelligence behind the phenomenon, its intentions inscrutable but not hostile. As dawn approached, the night's events leaving the group exhausted and exhilarated, a shared sense of reverence settled over them, the Trents, the researchers, and Collins, each aware that the McMinnville UFO photographs, the recurring lights, and the subtle paranormal intrusions were part of a continuum, a phenomenon that transcended conventional categories, demanding patience, observation, and an openness to realities beyond current scientific paradigms, a challenge both thrilling and profoundly unsettling. And in the quiet hours, when the farm was still and the last sensors hummed softly in the background, the Trents felt that their role was not merely to witness but to participate, to observe and document, to interpret and integrate, aware that the photographs were only the beginning, that the McMinnville UFO had opened a doorway, one that stretched across perception, consciousness, and the very structure of reality itself, setting the stage for encounters, revelations, and questions that would persist far into the future, as persistent and enigmatic as the lights that had first appeared over their orchard in the spring of 1950. By early summer, the McMinnville farm had transformed into something unrecognizable from the quiet homestead it had once been. The fields, once simply a patchwork of crops and pasture, now seemed alive with subtle energy, a palpable tension that made the hairs on Paul's arms stand on end, and Evelyn often remarked that the trees themselves appeared to lean slightly toward certain areas, as if responding to an invisible force, their leaves rustling in patterns that suggested communication rather than mere wind, while the research team, Halsey, Dr. Linden, and Clark, set up an intricate array of sensors, cameras, and recording devices across the property, creating a grid of observation that sometimes felt more like an altar than a scientific setup, and the combination of instruments, human attention, and latent consciousness seemed to attract phenomena in a way that defied rational explanation. Each day brought new anomalies, small lights that darted across the horizon at impossible angles, reflections in the camera lenses that were absent to the naked eye, and auditory phenomena that fluctuated between low-frequency hums and high-pitched, almost musical tones that resonated deep in the chest, compelling the observers to listen with focused attention, as if the universe itself were whispering secrets meant only for those willing to perceive. Evelyn's dreams became increasingly vivid and interactive, a strange form of lucid vision where the metallic corridors she had first imagined in sleep extended into landscapes she could manipulate consciously, corridors that seemed to map both her consciousness and the trajectory of the UFO's appearances. A subtle correspondence that led her to suspect that the phenomenon was as much psychological and perceptual as it was physical, challenging every assumption about the boundaries of experience. Paul, meanwhile, began to notice peculiar patterns in the behavior of the farm animals, cows pausing mid-step to gaze at invisible points in space, horses stamping their hooves toward empty patches of earth, and birds circling in formations that mirrored geometrical patterns Evelyn had sketched, as if the natural world itself had been drawn into the orbit of something unseen yet deliberate, a living experiment in which human and non-human observers were equally participants. Halsey's focus intensified, his once methodical note-taking giving way to fevered calculations, geometric sketches, and speculative diagrams linking the McMinnville sighting to other reports across the country, his theory expanding into the notion that the phenomena were not singular events but nodes in a network of consciousness, energy, and observation, with the trance farm acting as a localized focal point, a place where the ordinary and extraordinary converged with unusual density. Clark's photographic work revealed subtle anomalies in previously overlooked negatives, faint, shadowy forms that seemed to move independently of the disk itself, patterns of iridescent light that pulse with rhythmic regularity, and spectral shapes appearing in multiple exposures with consistent positioning, suggesting a presence that was not only observing but interacting with the environment, leaving traces that were perceptible only through careful analysis, almost as if the phenomenon were aware of the act of observation and responded accordingly. Marianne Collins, ever the meticulous journalist, began drawing connections between Evelyn's dreams, Paul's field notes, and Clark's photographic anomalies, hypothesizing that the UFO phenomena might operate on multiple planes simultaneously, physical, psychic, and perhaps interdimensional, and that their observation was creating feedback loops, a layered dialogue between human consciousness and intelligence far beyond terrestrial understanding, a theory both exhilarating and terrifying in its implications. Local townspeople continued to report strange occurrences, unexplained lights over the orchards, fleeting shadows along country roads, and sudden temperature fluctuations that left thermometers oscillating wildly, events dismissed by some as superstition but which mirrored precisely the anomalies being documented on the farm, reinforcing the idea that the McMinnville sighting was not isolated but part of a broader, perhaps global, phenomenon that intersected with human perception and cognition in unpredictable ways. One evening, as the sky darkened into deep violet, the researchers observed a new manifestation. A luminous sphere descended slowly into the orchard, its surface shimmering with colors that defied description, reflecting the setting sun while simultaneously emitting an inner glow, hovering for several minutes as if studying the land and its inhabitants, before ascending rapidly, leaving behind a faint, vibrating hum that resonated through both instruments and the chest cavity of those present. A tactile awareness that something beyond the ordinary had just communicated presence and intent. Evelyn, sensing a connection between the sphere and her dreams, sketched the patterns she saw in her mind, noting intricate spirals and intersecting lines that seemed to describe a form of nonverbal language, a symbolic system the phenomenon might be using to interact with consciousness, while Paul attempted to map the trajectory of the sphere. noting precise movements that hinted at intelligence guiding its path rather than random drift, a realization that reinforced the team's growing conviction that they were witnessing a deliberate, directed presence. Halsey, unable to restrain his excitement, proposed experiments in which human observation would be paired with control lighting and electromagnetic emissions, attempting to measure responses in both instruments and the phenomenon itself. The notion that human perception could influence, or at least correlate with, the behavior of the UFOs becoming a central theme of their investigation, a delicate dance between objectivity and participation that challenged conventional scientific methodology. As the nights wore on, subtle psychological effects began to manifest among the group. Halsey experienced moments of vertigo and altered perception, feeling simultaneously larger and smaller than the space around him. Dr. Linden reported fleeting auditory hallucinations resembling melodic sequences not produced by any identifiable source. Clark's dreams began to mimic the movements of the lights, with surreal sensations of hovering and rotation, and Evelyn found herself slipping into a trance. Like state while sketching, her hand guided by impulses she could not consciously control, producing diagrams of impossible geometry that nonetheless mirrored patterns observed in the orchard. The transformed house itself seemed to respond to the phenomena, with ordinary objects occasionally moving without explanation, doors opening or closing silently, and temperature shifts localized in small areas, suggesting a direct interaction with matter or energy. Subtle manipulations that reinforced the theory that the UFO presence was aware of the human observers and capable of exerting influence over the environment without manifesting as a conventional physical entity. One night, Paul noticed a faint outline of a figure standing beyond the orchard, barely perceptible but undeniably humanoid, elongated in proportion and reflecting ambient light in a way that suggested a semi-transparent, possibly energy-based form. When he called out, it vanished instantly, leaving only a sense of being watched and a lingering resonance in the soil beneath his feet, as if the earth itself had registered the presence of an intelligence whose dimensions did not conform to human understanding. Marian Collins, documenting the event in real time, hypothesized that the combination of human attention, psychic receptivity, and environmental sensitivity was creating a unique feedback loop, a nexus of consciousness and phenomena in which observation was not passive but interactive, a participatory process in which human perception and the UFO intelligence mutually influenced outcomes, producing anomalies that were simultaneously objective and subjective, physical and psychic. The town of McMinnville, increasingly aware of the ongoing activity, oscillated between skepticism and fascination. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones of strange aerial displays, shadowy figures, and unexplained sounds, contributing anecdotal evidence that mirrored the data collected on the farm, suggesting that the McMinnville phenomenon extended beyond the boundaries of the trans property, creating a field of influence or observation that subtly touched the lives of all who resided nearby. Amid these unfolding events, subtle clues began to emerge: repeated geometric patterns, synchronized light pulses, and recurring symbols in dreams and sketches hinted at an underlying intelligence attempting communication, perhaps using nonverbal, symbolic, or energetic means beyond conventional language, and the researchers began experimenting with methods of resonance and synchronization, attempting to align human attention and consciousness with these signals in the hope of eliciting clearer responses. In one particularly intense session, as the team concentrated on observing a cluster of lights descending into the orchard, Evelyn experienced a full-blown trance, her consciousness seeming to merge with the phenomenon, sensing trajectories, pulsations, and intentions that were invisible yet unmistakable, while Paul and the team watched instruments spike in correlation, recording electromagnetic fluctuations, subtle gravitational anomalies, and temperature shifts that coincided precisely with her trance state, reinforcing the notion of a multidimensional interplay between human awareness and the UFO presence. Halsey's excitement grew almost frantic as he posited that the McMinnville sightings represented a controlled experiment conducted by an intelligence capable of bridging physical and psychic planes, a hypothesis simultaneously exhilarating and unnerving, suggesting that observation, intention, and consciousness could be manipulated in ways that challenged the very foundations of human understanding, a reality in which the simple act of witnessing was an act of participation in a much larger, unknowable system. As dawn approached, the luminous sphere that had hovered the night before returned briefly, moving in perfect synchrony with the patterns Evelyn had drawn during her trance, a correspondence so precise that it left no doubt in the minds of those present that the intelligence behind the phenomenon was not only aware of human perception but actively engaging with it, teaching, testing, or communicating in a medium beyond words. A realization that shifted the focus of the investigation from mere documentation to conscious interaction, a recognition that the McMinnville UFO was not an isolated event but a doorway into a complex, multidimensional reality that encompassed physics, consciousness, and perception in ways humanity had yet to understand. Exhausted yet exhilarated, the group retreated to the farmhouse, aware that they had crossed a threshold, that the photographs were now inseparable from a living, interactive phenomenon, and that the McMinnville UFO sightings were a continuing dialogue between human observation and intelligence, a narrative written not in words but in light, geometry, and resonance, one that demanded patience, openness, and courage from those willing to see, feel, and participate in the unfolding mystery of the skies above their small Oregon town. As summer deepened, the McMinnville farm seemed to exist in a liminal space, caught between ordinary life and the extraordinary, where every shadow, flicker of light, and sound carried the weight of unasked questions, and the trance sense of normalcy became increasingly tenuous. Paul continued his meticulous rounds of the property, cataloging subtle anomalies in the soil, tracking the trajectories of lights that appeared in the sky with uncanny regularity, and noting the behavior of animals, whose reactions suggested awareness of something beyond human perception, while Evelyn's dreams and sketches became more vivid, often matching movements of luminous objects in the orchard almost in real time, creating a sense that the phenomenon was using her mind as a conduit, an intermediary to bridge the gap between the material world and whatever intelligence had first descended upon their farm. Halsey's obsession with the case intensified, his days consumed by cross-referencing photographs, sensor readings, and Paul's field observations, while he argued with Dr. Linden about theoretical explanations, discussing possibilities that ranged from interdimensional physics to consciousness-based manifestations, a mix of rigorous science and speculative reasoning that bordered on the mystical, yet was grounded in meticulously recorded data. Clark, tirelessly documenting the night skies, began noticing shapes within the lights that suggested geometric consistency, recurring forms that hinted at deliberate design rather than random phenomenon, reinforcing the team's growing conviction that they were witnessing an intelligence orchestrating events with intent and precision. Collins, the journalist, began to suspect that the McMinnville UFO sightings were more than isolated occurrences, theorizing that the interactions they were observing formed part of a global pattern of intelligence and observation, instances where human consciousness and non-human intelligence intersected in ways that left tangible traces, photographs, electromagnetic fluctuations, psychic impressions, and subtle environmental anomalies, a network of interaction that transcended space, time, and ordinary understanding, and she worked tirelessly to document every nuance, aware that the story was evolving into something far larger than simple local curiosity. The nights grew dense with tension, the orchard illuminated intermittently by strange lights that danced, hovered, and sometimes pulsed in synchronization with the researchers' instruments, and Evelyn began experimenting with lucid observation, attempting to consciously perceive the patterns and movements of these objects, finding herself mentally tracing spirals, grids, and intersecting arcs that seemed to correspond perfectly with what appeared above, a phenomenon that left her both exhilarated and unnerved, a realization that she was becoming an active participant rather than a passive witness. One evening, as the sky dimmed into twilight, Paul observed an anomaly that defied previous experience, a translucent figure, vaguely humanoid but taller and wider than a human frame, gliding across the edge of the orchard, moving with deliberate slowness and awareness. pausing to hover over a patch of ground where grass had been flattened in intricate patterns, before disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind an electric tang in the air and a persistent sense of presence. Feeling that this intelligence was studying them, their instruments, and perhaps even their thoughts, testing boundaries, and observing reactions with patient curiosity. Halsey immediately set up additional monitoring equipment, expanding the sensor network to detect subtle changes in electromagnetic fields, temperature, and atmospheric density, theorizing that the phenomenon's behavior was linked to the attention, expectation, and conscious observation of the humans present, that the more closely they watch, the more responsive, or at least interactive, the intelligence became, a theory that seemed increasingly supported by patterns in the instruments that correlated precisely with human movement, gaze, and attention. Clark's photographs captured fleeting glimpses of shapes that appeared to have physicality yet shimmered with an iridescent quality, semi-transparent and elusive, their consistency across multiple exposures suggesting that these were not simple optical artifacts, while Evelyn's sketches began incorporating spirals, fractal patterns, and geometric forms that appeared to align with the object's positions in space, a visual language developing in parallel with the phenomena, an emergent system of communication that seemed to operate outside conventional physics yet observable through perception, intuition, and pattern recognition. Collins documented everything meticulously, noting that the correlation between human perception and manifestation suggested a participatory phenomenon, one that was as much psychological and perceptual as it was physical, a complex interplay between consciousness, observation, and non-human intelligence that challenged the boundaries of empirical science, yet produced verifiable anomalies in instruments and tangible effects on the environment, compelling even skeptics among the team to acknowledge the strangeness of what they were witnessing. The town itself had become a secondary observation network, as neighbors occasionally reported lights moving in formations matching those recorded at the farm, unusual shadows along country roads, and temperature anomalies in isolated areas, reinforcing the notion that the phenomenon was extending its influence beyond the immediate vicinity of the trans property, a subtle but undeniable field of effect that touched multiple lives, creating an invisible network of interaction and observation. During one night of intense observation, a series of lights descended in precise arcs over the orchard, each movement correlating with the activation of sensors in real time, and Evelyn experienced a trance-like state in which she mentally traced the object's trajectories, sensing intention and rhythm, a nonverbal communication that conveyed curiosity, acknowledgement, and perhaps instruction, leaving her shaken yet convinced that the phenomenon was sentient and capable of engaging with human consciousness in direct and deliberate ways. Paul, recording every detail in his journal, noted that the phenomenon appeared to respond not only to conscious observation but also to subtle emotional states. Heightened attention, anticipation, and even fear seemed to modulate the behavior of lights and shapes, a pattern suggesting that the intelligence was actively measuring, analyzing, and interacting with human responses, a feedback loop of perception, cognition, and action that blurred the line between observer and observed. Halsey theorized that the McMinnville sightings represented a model system for studying consciousness, perception, and interaction with non-human intelligence, a natural laboratory in which human attention and intention were integral components, while Clark's photographs increasingly documented secondary phenomena, shadowy forms, iridescent pulses, and spectral grades that suggested an architectural intelligence operating in a plane partially accessible to human senses. Evelyn, driven by her dream patterns and the tangible correspondence with observed phenomena, began producing increasingly complex diagrams, fractal maps of light movement, geometric notations, and spirals that seemed to predict or reflect events, a visual codex through which the phenomenon communicated, and she shared these with Collins, who began compiling a comprehensive record correlating sketches, sensor data, and photographs into a single archive, hoping to capture the emergent narrative of interaction in a coherent form. One particularly intense night, As the team focused on a cluster of hovering lights, a new anomaly emerged. A pulsating sphere descended slowly, its surface covered in intricate, shifting patterns, as though alive with energy, hovering precisely over a patch of grass flattened in fractal formations, and as the observers watched, they felt a subtle pressure in the air, a sensation of being encompassed, measured, and acknowledged simultaneously, the instruments registering electromagnetic fluctuations and minute shifts in gravitational force, an empirical reflection of the subjective experience of being observed by an intelligence beyond known comprehension. Collins, recording the events, hypothesized that the phenomena were communicating through multimodal channels: light, pattern, resonance, psychic interaction, and environmental influence, a system both deliberate and adaptive, one that actively incorporated human perception as a functional component, creating a participatory experiment that challenged assumptions about reality, consciousness, and the limits of observation. In the days that followed, subtle psychological and physical effects became apparent. Halsey reported bouts of disorientation and heightened perception. Clark began experiencing vivid dreams in which he navigated luminous corridors mirroring the orchard. Evelyn's sketches continued to prefigure observable events, and Paul's journal reflected a growing sense of awe and responsibility, recognizing that their observation and documentation were not merely records but integral to the ongoing phenomenon, that their lives and consciousness were woven into a narrative larger than themselves, one that spanned dimensions, intelligence, and understanding. The farm itself seemed to pulse with life, the barn, orchard, and fields exhibiting subtle energy fluctuations, minor shifts in temperature, and the occasional inexplicable movement of objects, all corresponding in timing and intensity with observed light phenomena and human attention, reinforcing the notion of a dynamic interplay between consciousness and non-human intelligence, a co-creative interaction in which observation was both method and participant, producing patterns, communication, and insight accessible only to those attuned to the emergent system. By the end of this cycle, the trends, the researchers, and Collins had come to understand that the McMinnville UFO sightings were not merely historical anomalies captured in photographs, nor simply repeatable visual phenomena, but part of an ongoing, interactive intelligence capable of bridging perception, environment, and consciousness, a living system that operated at the intersection of physics, awareness, and the unknown, a phenomenon that required patience, openness, and careful observation, and one that had irrevocably altered the perception of reality for all involved, leaving the small Oregon farm both a beacon and a laboratory for the inexplicable forces that hovered just beyond the threshold of ordinary human understanding. As midsummer settled over McMinnville, the farm seemed to exist in a state suspended between ordinary reality and the extraordinary, every morning light revealing subtle changes in the landscape and atmosphere, the orchards seeming almost to breathe, the grass bending in imperceptible waves, and the horizon occasionally punctuated by glimmers of unidentifiable shapes hovering silently in the sky, while Paul, increasingly attuned to these nuances, mapped their appearances with painstaking precision, noting correlations with previous sightings, the patterns of the trees, and even shifts in soil temperature, a practice that began to feel less like measurement and more like communication with something beyond the visible world. Evelyn, whose dreams had intensified into fully immersive experiences, sketched diagrams and fractal formations directly corresponding to observed phenomena, noting spirals, intersecting arcs, and luminous notes that seemed to encode information, a visual language she began to feel compelled to decipher, believing that the intelligence behind the lights was attempting to establish a dialogue through perception and intuition, and she often lingered in the orchard at dawn and dusk, trying to sense the subtle rhythms that govern the object's movements, a meditation of observation, connection, and receptivity. Halsey's obsession reached new heights, his notebooks filled with calculations, geometric sketches, and speculative theory, some bordering on metaphysical conjecture as he tried to reconcile the empirical data with the subjective experiences reported by the Trents and Collins. Dr. Linden continued to analyze electromagnetic fluctuations, temperature anomalies, and gravitational perturbations. His rational approach challenged by events that repeatedly defied conventional understanding. While Clark's photographs captured increasingly elaborate patterns of light and shadow, spectral shapes that seemed semi-autonomous yet consistently aligned with the positions Evelyn traced in her sketches, a phenomenon suggesting intentionality, awareness, and perhaps even instruction. The nights became a crucible of observation, the team establishing visual schedules, rotating shifts of watchfulness under the orchard and across the fields, instruments humming quietly in the background, and yet despite all preparation, the unexpected occurrences continued. Lights moving in impossible trajectories, objects shimmering into and out of perception, sudden gusts of wind localized to areas of observation, and the occasional sensation of being watched or measured, a palpable awareness that transcended sensory perception and hinted at intelligence of a scale and subtlety beyond human comprehension. Marian Collins, working tirelessly to correlate field data, photographs, and personal observations, began theorizing that the McMinnville phenomena were operating on multiple layers of reality simultaneously, a system in which human attention, expectation, and cognition acted as interactive variables, influencing outcomes in a participatory relationship. A hypothesis both exhilarating and terrifying in its implications, suggesting that their role as observers was inseparable from the phenomena themselves, that every glance, note, and gesture contributed to a dynamic, co-created interplay between consciousness and intelligence. One night, as the moon rose pale and silver above the orchard, a new anomaly manifested. A luminous structure of shifting geometric forms descended, hovering just above the ground, emitting a soft, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate directly through the instruments and into the observers' bodies. And as the team watched, Evelyn felt a mental pull, an intuitive awareness of trajectory, shape, and intention, experiencing the phenomenon almost as a thought in her own mind, a direct connection that left her simultaneously exhilarated and unnerved, the boundaries between internal and external perception dissolving as if the intelligence was granting a partial understanding through resonance rather than language. Paul noted that the patterns of movement and light seemed to correspond with emotional and cognitive states. Moments of anticipation, focus, or uncertainty appeared to alter trajectories subtly, while relaxation and calm amplified the coherence of visible patterns, a feedback loop suggesting a sensitivity to human perception that bordered on telepathic or interdimensional awareness, challenging every assumption the team held about the separation of observer and observed, mind and matter, subjective and objective experience. Halsey theorized that the McMinnville events were a microcosm of a universal principle, a demonstration of how intelligent entities, whether extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or psychic in nature, could engage with human awareness in ways that transcended ordinary sensory perception, using light, geometry, resonance, and psychic attunement to communicate, test, and interact. A participatory model in which reality itself was mutable according to consciousness, attention, and perception, an idea that both thrilled and unsettled him, forcing reconsideration of the boundaries of science, psychology, and the paranormal. Clark's photographs increasingly documented spectral forms alongside the physical manifestations of light, shapes that appeared in multiple frames yet eluded direct observation, their presence suggesting a semi-autonomous intelligence capable of interacting with both the physical and perceptual environment, a phenomenon that seemed to respond dynamically to the group's activity, attention, and instrumentation, creating patterns of light and movement that were both precise and fluid, deliberate, yet elusive, a living architecture of energy, perception, and interaction. Evelyn's dreams mirrored these developments with astonishing fidelity, sometimes preceding visible events by hours, providing guidance to Paul and the researchers about the location, timing, and behavior of the phenomena, a temporal anomaly in which consciousness appeared to interact with events both past and future, suggesting that the McMinnville intelligence was operating on multiple planes simultaneously. integrating human observation into a dynamic, evolving system of interaction. The townspeople, aware of increased activity through occasional glimpses of lights and unexplained environmental effects, began to participate passively, reporting subtle anomalies, while some were drawn into the observation network unconsciously, adding further layers to the feedback system between human perception and the unknown presence. Whispers of the phenomena extended to local authorities and media, though formal recognition was elusive, leaving the trends, the researchers, and Collins as the primary chroniclers, intermediaries between ordinary reality and a phenomenon that defied categorization. One night, a sudden cascade of luminous spheres appeared, moving in spirals and lattices that perfectly matched the diagrams Evelyn had been sketching, hovering in synchronization over flattened patches of grass that corresponded to fractal patterns she had previously observed, the instruments registering simultaneous electromagnetic fluctuations, micropressure changes, and gravitational anomalies. A convergence of subjective observation and objective measurement that left no doubt in the minds of the team that the intelligence behind the phenomenon was actively coordinating with human perception, an interactive presence shaping reality through both direct and mediated forms. Paul noted with fascination that the response of the lights and structures seemed to be not just observational but corrective. Small deviations in his or the team's focus appeared to alter the behavior of objects, implying that the intelligence could detect intent, attention, and perhaps emotional or cognitive state, an unsettling yet profoundly intriguing revelation that blurred the line between interaction, observation, and participation, raising philosophical, scientific, and psychological questions about the role of human consciousness in shaping or participating in a phenomenon that transcended ordinary understanding. Halsey's enthusiasm escalated as he proposed control experiments, synchronized observation, deliberate focus, meditation exercises, and structured attention sessions designed to gauge the responsiveness of the phenomenon, each experiment yielding results that suggested an intelligence capable of perceiving and responding to both intent and pattern. A participatory experiment on a scale that combined physics, consciousness, and perception, an interface between human cognition and an external, non-human awareness. Collins meticulously catalogued every nuance, from sketches and photographs to instrument readings and subjective experiences, assembling a layered archive that she recognized would form the most comprehensive record of the phenomenon yet documented, capturing the convergence of perception, cognition, and intelligence, both terrestrial and beyond, in a coherent narrative that simultaneously defied reduction to conventional scientific explanation. As dawn approached one morning, the orchard became the stage for an unprecedented event. A massive formation of lights descended, moving in precise geometric coordination, synchronized with the fractal patterns Evelyn had sketched the previous night, and as Paul, Evelyn, Halsey, Clark, and Collins observed, they felt an almost tangible resonance, an awareness that they were witnessing not mere displays but deliberate communication, instruction, or demonstration, a multidimensional interaction that encompassed light, perception, psychic resonance, and environmental influence, leaving each participant simultaneously exhilarated, humbled, and profoundly altered. In the aftermath, the team convened in the farmhouse, exhausted yet exhilarated, recognizing that their investigation had moved far beyond documentation into interaction, that the McMinnville UFO phenomena were not static events captured on film but ongoing, conscious manifestations capable of engaging with human observation, cognition, and emotion, a participatory system that had irrevocably changed their understanding of reality, perception, and the potential reach of intelligent, non-human presence in the world around them, setting the stage for further exploration, deeper questions, and encounters that would continue to challenge the boundaries of comprehension, leaving McMinnville itself transformed into a nexus of observation, consciousness, and the inexplicable. As July unfolded over McMinnville, the Trans Farm had become an epicenter of observation, sensation, and subtle disturbance, a place where ordinary life was overlaid with phenomena that challenged perception, reason, and imagination. Paul's days began before dawn, walking the orchards and fields with his notebooks and instruments, noting the slightest anomalies in soil patterns, grass height, animal behavior, and the occasional flicker of light that defied ordinary explanation, while Evelyn devoted herself to mapping her dreams against real-world events, sketching spirals, arcs, and luminous notes that often prefigured sightings, her consciousness increasingly attuned to the rhythms, patterns, and intelligence behind the phenomenon, sometimes sensing subtle pulses or intentional gestures in the air itself, as if the orchard and sky had become a language she could slowly interpret. Halsey, consumed with theory, worked late into the night analyzing sensor data, cross-referencing photographic evidence, and debating with Dr. Linden the potential for interdimensional or consciousness-based interactions, suggesting that the McMinnville events might be a hybrid phenomenon, part physical, part psychic, and part unknown intelligence operating outside conventional constraints, a hypothesis that increasingly seemed supported by the consistency of instrument readings with subjective perception, and the team began to realize that human attention was not merely incidental but a key component of the phenomenon's manifestation. Clark's photographs reveal increasingly complex interactions, shapes that shimmered between opacity and translucence, patterns in the sky corresponding to fractal diagrams Evelyn had drawn days earlier, and luminous arcs and grids that seemed to hover just beyond direct perception, only discernible when photographed or observed through layered filters, reinforcing the notion that the intelligence behind the UFOs operated on multiple perceptual planes simultaneously, engaging with both the environment and consciousness in a coordinated system. Marian Collins meticulously documented the correlations between observation, perception, and manifestation, noting that human consciousness, focus, expectation, and emotional state appeared to influence not just timing but form, trajectory, and intensity of the phenomena, suggesting a participatory relationship in which observers became active contributors to the unfolding events, a realization that blurred traditional distinctions between observer and observed, mind and matter, subjective and objective reality. One evening, as twilight descended and the orchard became bathed in pale orange light, a sudden series of luminous spheres descended in intricate spirals, hovering just above the grass and reflecting colors that defied description, and Evelyn experienced a profound connection in which she felt the motion of the lights as an extension of her own consciousness, tracing patterns she could feel as much as see, a direct interface between her perception and the intelligence orchestrating the phenomenon, leaving her simultaneously exhilarated and overwhelmed. Paul recorded the precise timing, trajectory, and spatial relationships of the spheres, noting minute fluctuations in electromagnetic readings, temperature, and micropressure changes, while Halsey speculated on the potential for multidimensional physics at work. Dr. Linden monitored gravitational anomalies, and Clark captured hundreds of exposures, each revealing subtle but consistent spectral forms, ghostly presences that move in synchrony with the lights, suggesting a semi-autonomous intelligence interacting with the environment and observers alike. The Trans farmhouse seemed to respond to these events in turn, doors occasionally moving, shadows stretching or elongating in impossible ways, temperature shifts localized to specific rooms, and instruments oscillating in rhythm with observed phenomena, subtle interactions that reinforced the sense that the intelligence was aware, responsive, and perhaps even communicating through environmental feedback, a dynamic interplay that demanded both observation and attentiveness from those present. Collins hypothesized that the combination of human focus, psychic receptivity, and environmental sensitivity created a field of interaction, an interface through which the intelligence could manifest selectively, providing both visual and sensory data, while simultaneously registering observer attention, emotional state, and cognitive expectation, an adaptive system that blurred the lines between science, perception, and experiential reality, a phenomenon both empirical and mystical. One particularly intense night, as the team focused on a cluster of hovering lights, Evelyn entered a trance-like state, experiencing the environment as a living, interconnected field, sensing the trajectory, intent, and energy of each luminous form, and perceiving patterns that prefigured subsequent events, a temporal and perceptual anomaly in which her mind appeared to synchronize with intelligence operating on multiple levels, her hand tracing fractal geometries and intersecting arcs that match objects' movement in real time, leaving her both exhilarated and profoundly unsettled. Paul observed the same events with instruments and notes, recording minor fluctuations in the local magnetic field, slight distortions in spatial dimensions, and rhythmic pressure pulses, all occurring simultaneously with Evelyn's trance, suggesting a direct correspondence between human consciousness and measurable physical anomalies, while Halsey and Dr. Linden debated whether the intelligence was testing, guiding, or simply demonstrating capabilities far beyond human comprehension. Clark's photographs further revealed secondary phenomena, semi-transparent forms, shifting iridescent grids, and spectral shapes that appeared in multiple exposures, suggesting intelligent coordination, while the sensors detected pulses and resonance patterns that align precisely with observed motion, reinforcing the participatory nature of the phenomenon and highlighting the intersection of perception, intention, and external manifestation. Townspeople reported subtle but noticeable effects coinciding with observation, lights moving in the sky, shadows forming along roads, temperature variations, and fleeting auditory anomalies, creating a network of passive observers whose presence and awareness subtly intersected with the phenomenon, further blurring the boundaries between direct observation and ambient interaction, suggesting that McMinnville had become a node in a larger, intelligent system of observation and response. Halsey proposed control observation sessions, pairing human focus with intentional measurement, synchronization exercises, and observational meditation, attempting to align consciousness with patterns in the environment and the luminous phenomena, while Collins meticulously documented correlations, timing, and response patterns, assembling an emergent narrative in which human cognition became both a tool and a medium for understanding the intelligence behind the lights. One night, a sudden, massive formation of luminous arcs descended over the orchard, moving with deliberate precision, corresponding to fractal diagrams Evelyn had drawn earlier, and as the observers watched, they experienced the environment as a resonant field, vibrations synchronizing with heartbeats, breaths, and mental focus, a multisensory interface that suggested intelligence actively engaging with the group, offering communication without words, and demonstrating mastery of perception, physics, and consciousness. The team noted that subtle shifts in attention, expectation, and even emotion produced measurable changes, slight deviations in focus altered trajectories, increased attentiveness enhanced synchronization, and calm observations seemed to magnify coherence in the patterns, a participatory loop in which perception shaped manifestation, and manifestation guided perception, creating a dynamic interface between human cognition and the phenomenon itself. Evelyn's sketches became increasingly predictive, capturing patterns, intersections, and movements before they occurred, while Paul's instruments corroborated her observations with precision. Halsey theorized about the intersection of consciousness and multidimensional physics, Dr. Linden monitored environmental anomalies, and Clark documented spectral forms invisible to the naked eye, a multidisciplinary convergence reinforcing the reality that McMinnville was not merely a site of historical UFO sightings but an ongoing locus of intelligence, interaction, and observation, a participatory system spanning perception, consciousness, and physical reality. The farm, the orchard, and even the farmhouse itself seemed to hum with energy, subtle pressures and vibrations registering on instruments and in human perception alike, reinforcing the sense that the McMinnville phenomenon was aware of human attention, and that the observers were active participants in a dynamic, intelligent system whose rules were not yet fully understood but whose patterns were increasingly evident to those willing to observe, record, and engage. By the end of the week, the team understood that they had crossed a threshold. The photographs, the lights, the environmental anomalies, and the psychic impressions were not isolated events but elements of an ongoing, participatory intelligence, one that interacted with human perception, altered environmental conditions, and demonstrated deliberate, memorable responses to observation and consciousness. An entity or system that demanded patience, openness, and a willingness to experience reality beyond conventional boundaries, transforming the McMinnville farm from an ordinary homestead into a laboratory of perception, interaction, and the inexplicable, setting the stage for encounters, revelations, and understanding that would continue to unfold across the intersection of mind, matter, and intelligence far beyond ordinary comprehension. By the time August approached, the McMinnville farm had become a place of constant alertness, where each day and night were measured in terms of potential observation, interaction, and discovery, and the ordinary rhythms of farm life, feeding animals, tending orchards, repairing fences, had been overlaid with careful scanning of the skies, detailed notation of subtle environmental anomalies, and meticulous tracking of light phenomena whose patterns defied all previous understanding. Paul, now almost instinctively aware of the faintest disturbances in the air, noted irregularities in soil density, wind shifts, and the behavior of wildlife, from the direction of a bird's flight to the way cattle congregated along invisible lines, and he began suspecting that the land itself was part of a responsive system, an extension of the intelligence that had first manifested in the UFO sightings, while Evelyn's dreams continued to provide increasingly complex schematics, spirals, and fractal geometries that corresponded with the movements and behaviors of lights observed in the orchard, creating a form of nonverbal communication that she increasingly relied upon for guidance during observation sessions. Halsey's obsession deepened as he attempted to mathematically model the correlations between human attention, environmental changes, and the movements of luminous phenomena, producing charts, diagrams, and theoretical equations that were at once elegant and incomprehensible, suggesting influences that might transcend conventional spacetime or involve levels of intelligence capable of perceiving, interpreting, and responding to human consciousness with deliberate intention. Dr. Linden, though still cautious, could no longer dismiss the consistency of readings, electromagnetic flux, temperature variation, and localized gravitational anomalies, each aligning precisely with both the presence and mental focus of observers, suggesting a complex interface in which cognition, observation, and environment coalesced. Clark, capturing photographic evidence nightly, documented increasingly intricate patterns of light and form, including semi-transparent shapes that appeared to possess independent trajectories, complex grades, and shifting arcs that hovered in ways impossible for conventional aircraft or optical phenomena, each image reinforcing the idea that the McMinnville intelligence was capable of multidimensional operation, perceiving and interacting across planes of reality while selectively revealing aspects according to its own criteria, a process that was being actively mapped by the attentive, receptive observers. Collins, ever diligent, compiled field notes, sensor readings, photographs, and sketches, analyzing correlations and constructing a layered narrative that attempted to bridge subjective experience with observable measurement, realizing that the phenomenon could not be understood through traditional scientific methods alone, as it engaged simultaneously with mind, perception, environment, and instrument, producing an emergent system that was part physical, part psychic, and wholly intelligent, operating according to rules that humans were only beginning to discern. The nights themselves had grown increasingly immersive, the air charged with subtle energy, sounds that seemed to resonate in body and mind rather than merely being heard, and lights that moved with deliberate complexity, sometimes forming spirals, lattices, or grids that echoed the diagrams Evelyn produced in her waking or dream states, leaving all observers with a sense of being participants rather than mere witnesses, their attention, focus, and awareness actively influencing the behavior of the phenomenon, a relationship that was as exhilarating as it was disorienting. One evening, a new manifestation occurred. A semi-solid, iridescent form descended slowly into the orchard, its surface shifting with colors and textures that defied conventional perception, hovering just above a patch of grass previously mapped by Evelyn, as though recognizing the patterns she had documented and responding to her observational consciousness, a moment that left the team simultaneously awestruck and fearful, sensing both intelligence and intent behind the luminous presence, and awareness that observation was a participatory act with real consequences. Paul meticulously recorded the trajectory, height, and duration of the form, correlating it with both sensor data and environmental variables, while Halsey speculated on the possibility of direct consciousness interaction with material reality, hypothesizing that the intelligence could detect, interpret, and manipulate observer attention, perception, and intention to create measurable manifestations. A theory partially corroborated by Dr. Linden's data, which demonstrated subtle, localized gravitational and electromagnetic anomalies corresponding to both the object's behavior and the observer's mental focus. Clark's photographic evidence captured subtle secondary phenomena accompanying the main luminous form, iridescent trails, semi-autonomous spectral shapes, and shifting grades, all appearing in multiple exposures and aligning with Evelyn's schematics, reinforcing the notion that the intelligence was communicating via visual, geometric language, intentionally coordinated with human perception, a deliberate interplay between cognition, observation, and manifestation that suggested a level of intelligence far beyond terrestrial experience. The team began to notice patterns in timing, trajectory, and response that suggested intentionality. Deviations in human focus altered object behavior slightly, calm observation improved coherence in light formations, and emotional states such as awe or anticipation seemed to resonate through the environment, affecting both instrument readings and the behavior of luminous forms, a feedback loop in which consciousness and manifestation were inseparably linked, forming an ongoing interactive system in which the trance and the researchers were integral participants. Townspeople occasionally observed lights or subtle disturbances in the vicinity, anecdotal evidence that further supported the hypothesis that McMinnville had become a focal point for intelligence manifesting through perception, awareness, and environmental manipulation, an extended influence that included both direct observation at the farm and peripheral awareness in the surrounding community, a network of interaction that reinforced the participatory nature of the phenomenon. Evelyn's trance-like observations became increasingly predictive. Patterns, spirals, arcs, and lattice formations she sketched often appeared in real time, a synchronization that suggested preemptive awareness or guidance from the intelligence, a temporal anomaly in which perception seemed to precede manifestation, further blurring the boundaries between time, space, and consciousness. Paul, noting subtle changes in animal behavior and localized environmental effects, proposed a model of observation in which the farm itself acted as a resonant node, amplifying human attention and environmental sensitivity, producing an interface that allowed interaction with the intelligence behind the lights, while Halsey developed a theoretical framework that attempted to quantify the participatory dynamics of consciousness, observation, and multidimensional manifestation, a fusion of empirical data, speculative physics, and pattern analysis that suggested human cognition was an active component of the phenomenon. Collins compiled these observations into a cohesive narrative, cataloging temporal correlations, environmental variables, photographic evidence, and subjective experiences, recognizing that the McMinnville phenomenon was a complex, dynamic system in which the act of witnessing was inseparable from the observed, and that the photographs, far from being mere historical documentation, were living records of ongoing interaction, evidence of intelligence, and keys to understanding a phenomenon that operated simultaneously in multiple perceptual and dimensional planes. As night deepened on one particularly quiet evening, a massive cluster of lights descended into the orchard, moving in precise geometric coordination with Evelyn's sketches, and the observers experienced a profound resonance, sensing motion, intent, and pattern in a shared field of awareness, instruments registering coinciding electromagnetic fluctuations, temperature variations, and gravitational perturbations, a multidimensional manifestation of intelligence actively interacting with human consciousness and the physical environment, leaving the team both exhilarated and humbled, aware that they were participants in an ongoing dialogue with a phenomenon that transcended ordinary understanding. The farm itself seemed to hum with awareness, the air charged with subtle currents, and shadows moved in patterns that mirrored fractal geometries observed in dreams and sketches, reinforcing the impression that the intelligence was capable of perceiving, responding to, and even guiding observer attention, producing coordinated manifestations that blended light, resonance, perception, and physical reality into a cohesive system, a participatory and intelligent interface that demanded patience, focus, and openness from all involved. By the end of the week, the trends, the researchers, and Collins understood that the McMinnville UFO phenomena were not historical anomalies nor isolated sightings, but an ongoing, interactive intelligence capable of bridging perception, consciousness, and material reality, a participatory system in which observation was inseparable from manifestation, creating patterns, communication, and interactions that were both observable and experiential, measurable and psychic, and emergent intelligence that transformed the farm, and all who engaged with it, into both witness and participant in a mystery that would continue to unfold beyond comprehension. As August deepened into late summer, the McMinnville farm had become a nexus of perception, interaction, and uncanny phenomena, a place where the ordinary rhythms of daily life, feeding animals, tending orchards, repairing fences, were interlaced with heightened awareness of subtle environmental shifts, electromagnetic pulses, and the unpredictable dance of luminous forms that hovered, spiraled, and pulsed above the fields, while Paul meticulously documented every nuance, from slight changes in soil density and temperature to the behavior of animals that seemed attuned to unseen presences, the cows pausing mid-step, the horses stamping in synchronized patterns, and birds forming arcs in the sky that mirrored fractal sketches Evelyn had drawn in her dreams, an emergent choreography that suggested the intelligence behind the UFOs was aware not only of the observers but of the environment itself. Evelyn, increasingly attuned to these manifestations, spent hours sketching complex geometries, spirals, and notes, patterns that often prefigured events in real time, creating a form of communication that transcended words, as if the lights and their accompanying spectral phenomena were attempting to engage with human consciousness directly, providing information, guidance, or acknowledgement through a visual and psychic interface, a language of energy and pattern rather than speech. Halsey's analysis intensified, his notebooks filled with correlations, theoretical equations, and diagrams attempting to reconcile instrument readings with perceptual data, a synthesis of empirical observation and speculative theory that suggested the McMinnville intelligence could perceive, measure, and respond to human attention, intention, and emotional state. A participatory model in which observation itself became a mechanism for interaction and even co-creation, the more focused and receptive the observer, the more coherent the manifestations appeared. Clark's photography, layered with long exposures, filters, and multi-angle perspectives, documented forms that shimmered between opacity and translucence, spectral grids, arcs, and secondary shapes that consistently corresponded with Evelyn's sketches and with anomalies detected by sensors, a consistency that defied coincidence, suggesting intelligent design and responsiveness, a deliberate orchestration of space, light, and perception that integrated both environmental and cognitive variables into an interactive system. Collins, documenting correlations between observation, human focus, and manifestation, hypothesized that the McMinnville phenomenon operated as a multilayered interface, simultaneously perceptible and imperceptible, physical and psychic, a dynamic system where consciousness itself acted as a modulating variable, amplifying, shaping, or even guiding observable outcomes. An intelligence that created participatory interaction through subtle resonance, geometry, and pattern, requiring patience, attentiveness, and openness from human participants. One evening, as the sky dimmed into a deep violet, a cluster of luminous spheres descended into the orchard in an intricate lattice, moving in perfect synchronization with Evelyn's fractal diagrams, and the observers felt a resonant pulse, a subtle vibration through instruments, soil, and their own bodies, suggesting an awareness and interaction that transcended mere optical phenomenon, a direct connection between human perception, environment, and intelligence, leaving the team exhilarated, awed, and unnervingly aware of their role in this unfolding system. Paul carefully recorded the precise timing, height, and position of each sphere, noting minute fluctuations in electromagnetic and gravitational readings, while Halsey proposed that these occurrences were evidence of a participatory intelligence capable of detecting human attention and responding to both intentional focus and unconscious observation, a concept that challenged conventional scientific models and demanded a hybrid approach integrating physics, perception, and consciousness studies. Clark's photographs revealed secondary manifestations accompanying the luminous spheres, semi-transparent forms, iridescent pulses, and spectral shapes that hovered in alignment with the geometric diagrams Evelyn had sketched, a visible reflection of intent or response, an intelligent interaction that seemed both instructional and observant, a deliberate engagement with human cognition and perception, producing a feedback loop in which observation and manifestation were inseparably intertwined. Evelyn, during her trance-like observations, traced the movements of lights and forms with her mind and hand, sensing patterns, intentions, and emergent geometries that prefigured subsequent events, a phenomenon that suggested temporal and perceptual anomalies, an awareness of multiple layers of reality operating concurrently, and the observers began to recognize that the McMinnville intelligence might be demonstrating, teaching, or interacting in a nonverbal, nonlinear form of communication. The trance form itself seemed to respond in kind, subtle shifts in temperature, localized air currents, and movement of objects reinforcing the impression of a sentient environment, an extension of the intelligence that orchestrated luminous forms and engaged with human observation, suggesting a level of awareness that encompassed both the immediate observers and the surrounding environment, producing measurable effects correlated with attention, focus, and emotional state. Collins noted that anecdotal reports from townspeople, previously dismissed as coincidence, often coincided with observations at the farm, unusual lights, shadows, and environmental anomalies reported across McMinnville hinted at a field of influence extending beyond the trance property, a subtle network of participatory observation linking multiple conscious observers to the intelligence behind the UFO manifestations, reinforcing the participatory, co-creative nature of the phenomenon. Halsey conducted control experiments pairing observation with instrumentation, synchronization exercises, and meditative focus, attempting to discern the parameters by which human attention influenced manifestation, finding consistent correlations. Focus observation increased the coherence and predictability of luminous patterns, while emotional or cognitive shifts produced measurable changes in trajectory, speed, or form, a dynamic interplay of consciousness, perception, and intelligent response that challenged traditional scientific methodology. One night, a particularly massive display occurred. A geometric formation of lights descended over the orchard, moving in spirals, arcs, and grids that precisely mirrored Evelyn's sketches, while spectral shapes hovered above, shifting in semi-transparent waves that aligned with sensor anomalies, gravitational variations, and electromagnetic pulses, a convergence of physical, perceptual, and psychic manifestations that suggested a multidimensional intelligence actively engaging with the human participants, the environment, and instruments in a coordinated and deliberate manner. Paul, recording every detail, noticed subtle shifts in animals' behavior that corresponded with the visual and psychic manifestations, sudden pauses, head tilts, synchronized movement, and attention directed toward invisible points, a demonstration of environmental sensitivity or attunement to the intelligence present. reinforcing the idea that the phenomenon engaged with multiple levels of consciousness simultaneously, from humans to animals to the ambient environment. Clark's photographs, layered over multiple nights, revealed recurring motifs, spirals, lattices, fractal intersections, and shifting spectral grades, aligning with Evelyn's drawings, instruments, and environmental anomalies, a visual language suggesting intelligent coordination, consistency, and perhaps an effort to communicate or demonstrate principles beyond ordinary understanding. The team began to understand that observation was itself a participatory act. That human attention, perception, and emotional engagement were integral to the manifestation and coherence of events, a feedback loop that required careful focus, patience, and alignment with the rhythm and intelligence of the phenomenon, reinforcing the participatory, co-creative nature of the McMinnville occurrences. By the end of this intense cycle, the researchers, and Collins were aware that the McMinnville UFO phenomena were not isolated historical anomalies but an ongoing, interactive intelligence, a system that engaged perception, consciousness, and environment, producing measurable, observable, and experiential manifestations, a dynamic interface in which humans were not mere observers but active participants in a phenomenon that challenged understanding, perception, and reality itself. Leaving the farm, the town, and all involved irrevocably changed and attuned to an intelligence that breached dimensions, consciousness, and perception in ways that defied conventional explanation. As the last days of August approached, the McMinnville farm had fully transformed into a nexus of observation, energy, and multidimensional interaction, where the ordinary rhythms of rural life were interwoven with subtle vibrations, luminous formations, and phenomena that defied conventional perception. Paul's daily routine had evolved into a careful sequence of measurement, observation, and note-taking, mapping subtle shifts in the orchard, the angles of light, and the behavior of animals. While Evelyn's sketches became increasingly elaborate, intricate networks of spirals, fractals, and geometric intersections that seemed to map not only movement in the sky but also the invisible forces animating the environment, producing diagrams that frequently align with subsequent manifestations, as though the intelligence guiding the phenomena recognized her perception and incorporated it into the unfolding system. Halsey, consumed by the challenge of reconciling empirical data with subjective observation, compiled extensive charts of light movement, electromagnetic flux, gravitational anomalies, and temporal correlations, hypothesizing that the phenomenon operated both within and outside human perception, a multidimensional intelligence capable of interacting with cognition, environment, and instrumentation, an adaptive system in which human attention, focus, and emotional state became functional variables influencing manifestation. Clark's photography revealed secondary phenomena of extraordinary subtlety, translucent grids, semi-autonomous shapes, iridescent pulses, and shifting arcs that consistently mirrored Evelyn's sketches and correlated precisely with anomalies detected in instruments, reinforcing the theory that the intelligence orchestrated interactions with both the environment and observers. A deliberate coordination of perception, cognition, and physical manifestation that defied simple explanation and suggested deliberate communication, experimentation, or demonstration. Collins' documentation of field notes, instruments, and observational reports revealed a participatory system, in which consciousness and attention modulated outcomes, producing variations in light movement, speed, form, and spectral appearance, a feedback loop that blurred the line between observer and phenomenon, mind and material, subjective and objective, leaving the team with the realization that their act of witnessing was itself a critical component of the ongoing events. One night, as twilight gave way to a deep indigo sky, a cluster of luminous spheres descended, moving in intricate spirals and arcs that matched fractal diagrams Evelyn had drawn the previous night, while semi-transparent forms hovered above, shifting in alignment with gravitational and electromagnetic anomalies measured by Paul and Dr. Linden, suggesting an intelligent system responding to attention, observation, and consciousness in a synchronized, multidimensional interaction. Paul meticulously recorded trajectory, altitude, and duration, noting that microfluctuations in light movement corresponded with subtle shifts in observer attention, breathing patterns, and emotional state, while Halsey proposed that this was evidence of a participatory consciousness interface, a system in which human perception became a variable in the expression of intelligence, a co-creative loop in which observation and manifestation were inseparable. Clark's photographs, layered over multiple nights and exposures, captured recurring motifs, lattices, spirals, and arcs that consistently align with Evelyn's sketches and with environmental anomalies, reinforcing the impression of an intelligent, responsive system capable of perceiving and integrating human cognition into its expression, a phenomenon that transcended ordinary visual perception and required multidimensional awareness to fully apprehend. Evelyn, in trance-like observation sessions, felt the movements of light as extensions of her own perception, sensing intention, rhythm, and pattern, occasionally predicting the behavior of luminous forms before they manifested, a temporal and perceptual anomaly suggesting interaction across multiple layers of reality simultaneously, the observer's consciousness resonating with intelligence that operated beyond ordinary comprehension, producing experiences that were at once psychic, physical, and empirical. The farm itself seemed alive with responsive energy, localized temperature fluctuations, micropressure waves, and subtle currents of air corresponded with light patterns, movements of animals, and observer focus, reinforcing the sense that the environment was not passive but an active component of the phenomenon, an extension of intelligence engaging with cognition, perception, and attention, producing measurable effects both visible and intangible. Townspeople occasionally reported unusual lights, strange shadows, and transient environmental anomalies that coincided with events at the farm, creating a peripheral network of observation that further suggested a distributed, participatory system, a field of influence extending beyond the immediate locus of McMinnville, amplifying the notion that observation and consciousness were integral to manifestation, and that human attention, intentional or otherwise, was woven into the interactive matrix. One night, a massive geometric display unfolded, a lattice of spheres, arcs, and grids descended in precise coordination with Evelyn's diagrams, while spectral forms hovered and shifted above, aligning with sensor anomalies, electromagnetic pulses, and gravitational variations, producing a complex, multidimensional manifestation of intelligence actively interacting with both the environment and the observers, a phenomenon that demanded focus, patience, and attunement to subtle cues in perception, cognition, and sensory input. Paul observed minor but consistent correlations between observer focus and environmental response. Animals adjusted positions, air currents shifted, and light trajectories altered subtly in response to attention and expectation, demonstrating that observation itself modulated outcomes, reinforcing the participatory nature of the phenomenon and suggesting an intelligence capable of perceiving, interpreting, and responding to human consciousness with precision. Halsey, conducting control observation experiments, pet meditation, synchronized attention exercises, and instrumentation monitoring to map causal relationships, noting consistent interactions in which focused observation increased coherence in manifestation, while lapses in attention or shifts in emotion produce measurable changes in trajectory, intensity, or spatial arrangement. Evidence of a dynamic feedback loop between consciousness, environment, and intelligent expression. Collins meticulously recorded these interactions, integrating sketches, photographic evidence, instrument readings, and subjective experiences into a comprehensive archive that captured the multi-layered dynamics of the McMinnville phenomenon, recognizing that these events were not isolated anomalies but an ongoing, participatory intelligence capable of engaging cognition, perception, and material reality simultaneously, producing phenomena that were both measurable and experiential, visible and psychic, empirical and inexplicable. As dawn approached, A final cascade of luminous spheres and semi-transparent shapes moved in spirals and grids, resonating with both environmental and cognitive patterns, creating a shared experience of perception, understanding, and presence, a convergence of light, mind, and intelligence that left the observers profoundly altered, aware that they had crossed thresholds of perception and participation, and that the McMinnville UFO phenomena were not historical curiosities but an ongoing system of intelligence, interaction, and consciousness, a living interface that continued to unfold, evolving in synchronization with human attention, observation, and engagement, transforming the farm, the town, and the participants into co-creators and witnesses of a mystery that defied conventional understanding, a multidimensional phenomenon that breached space, time, consciousness, and perception, leaving the trance, Halsey, Clark, Evelyn, and Collins irrevocably attuned to a reality beyond ordinary human comprehension. As the heat of late August lingered over McMinnville, the farm had fully transformed into a nexus of perception, consciousness, and ongoing interaction with an intelligence that defied explanation, a place where each step through the orchard, each glance toward the horizon, carried the weight of potential observation and interaction, and the ordinary rhythm of farm life had become overlaid with careful monitoring of every nuance in light, temperature, electromagnetic fields, and the behavior of animals, all of which now seemed intricately attuned to the invisible intelligence that orchestrated luminous phenomena in the sky. Paul meticulously documented every shift in soil density, grass patterns, and localized air currents, noting the exact timing of aerial anomalies and their subtle correlations with environmental fluctuations, while Evelyn's sketches evolved into increasingly elaborate fractals, spirals, lattices, and nodal networks that prefigured events in real time, and emergent language of geometry and perception that suggested the intelligence behind the UFOs recognized, responded to, and perhaps even depended upon human observation, a nonverbal dialogue that blurred the lines between sender, receiver, and interpreter. Halsey, consumed by the challenge of mapping interactions between perception, cognition, and manifestation, compiled extensive records of light movement, electromagnetic variations, and gravitational anomalies, theorizing that the phenomenon represented a participatory system in which consciousness itself acted as an integral variable, influencing both the timing and the form of manifestations, a theory increasingly supported by correlations between observer attention and the coherence, precision, and complexity of luminous patterns, while Dr. Linden cautiously monitored environmental metrics, finding anomalies that seemed to defy conventional physical explanation, subtle but repeatable deviations in gravitational readings, temperature, and atmospheric density that corresponded consistently with observer focus and expectation. Clark's photography revealed secondary manifestations, translucent forms, shifting spectral arcs, iridescent grids, and semi-autonomous luminous entities that consistently mirrored Evelyn's diagrams and aligned with environmental anomalies, reinforcing the impression of an intelligent, responsive system capable of interacting simultaneously with the observers, instruments, and physical surroundings, a phenomenon that combined empirical measurability with subjective experience in ways that challenged traditional distinctions between reality, perception, and cognition. Collins' documentation highlighted patterns in timing, trajectory, and observer behavior, demonstrating that the intelligence behind the phenomenon actively engaged with human focus, expectation, and emotional state, creating a feedback loop in which attention modulated manifestation, and manifestation in turn guided perception, an ongoing co-creative interface that required patience, attentiveness, and openness from all participants, a system in which humans were not merely witnesses but integral components of the phenomena itself. One evening, as twilight deepened into indigo, a cascade of luminous spheres descended into the orchard in intricate spirals and grids, synchronized with fractal diagrams Evelyn had sketched hours earlier, while semi-transparent spectral forms hovered above, shifting in alignment with sensor readings of electromagnetic pulses, micropressure fluctuations, and gravitational anomalies, producing a multidimensional interaction that simultaneously engaged perception, cognition, and environmental responsiveness, leaving the observers with an overwhelming sense of presence, intention, and awareness emanating from the phenomenon. Paul meticulously logged every detail, recording trajectory, altitude, timing, and environmental conditions, noting subtle deviations in the movement of lights corresponding to minor shifts in observer attention, breathing, and emotional state, while Halsey postulated that this was evidence of a participatory intelligence interface in which human consciousness influenced manifestation, a dynamic co-creative process in which observation became an active component of reality. Clark's photographic evidence continued to capture recurring geometric motifs, lattices, arcs, spirals, that corresponded with Evelyn's sketches, environmental anomalies, and sensor fluctuations, further substantiating the theory that the intelligence coordinated phenomena in response to perception, attention, and cognitive focus, producing a deliberate, patterned interaction that transcended conventional understanding. Evelyn, in trance-like sessions, felt the movements and patterns of the lights as an extension of her own consciousness, sensing rhythm, direction, and intention, sometimes predicting the trajectories of spheres before they manifested physically, a temporal and perceptual anomaly suggesting that the phenomenon could operate across multiple layers of reality, integrating cognition, perception, and environmental factors into a single, coherent system of interaction. The farm itself seemed to pulse with awareness, temperature shifts, micropressure waves, and subtle air currents corresponded with light patterns, observer focus, and animal behavior, reinforcing the perception that the environment was an active participant, a responsive extension of the intelligence behind the UFO manifestations, capable of interacting with both human consciousness and the physical surroundings in a seamless, integrated manner. Townspeople occasionally reported lights, shadows, and transient anomalies that coincided with events at the farm, a peripheral network of observation hinting at a distributed participatory system extending beyond the immediate site, suggesting that awareness and attention from multiple human participants could influence or resonate with the phenomena, a collective interaction that expanded the intelligence's interface across space and consciousness. Halsey conducted control experiments pairing observation, meditative focus, and instrumentation monitoring, discovering consistent patterns in which sustained attention increased the coherence and predictability of light formations, while changes in observer emotion or expectation altered trajectories and intensity, revealing a feedback loop of perception, cognition, and intelligent response, a phenomenon as empirical as it was experiential. Collins meticulously catalogued every detail, assembling a layered archive that combined photographs, sketches, sensor readings, environmental data, and subjective impressions, recognizing that the McMinnville phenomena were neither isolated events nor historical anomalies, but an ongoing, interactive intelligence, a living system capable of engaging consciousness, perception, and environment simultaneously, producing manifestations that were both measurable and psychic, tangible and ephemeral, empirical and inexplicable. One night, a massive display of light unfolded over the orchard, a lattice of spheres, arcs, and grids moving with precision that mirrored Evelyn's diagrams, while spectral forms hovered above, aligning with sensor anomalies and environmental fluctuations, producing a multidimensional manifestation of intelligence actively engaging with human participants, the environment, and instruments in a deliberate, synchronized interaction, a shared experience of presence, rhythm, and pattern that left the observers both awed and profoundly altered. The team noted consistent correlations between attention, focus, and manifestation. Animals responded to the environment in synchrony with observer awareness, air currents shifted subtly in response to concentrated focus, and light formations adjusted with minor deviations in perception, demonstrating the participatory nature of the phenomena and suggesting that consciousness was not simply an observer but an integral component of the unfolding reality. By the end of this intense observational period, the trends, Halsey, Clark, Evelyn, and Collins understood that the McMinnville UFO phenomena represented a living, intelligent system, a participatory interface bridging perception, cognition, and the material environment, a dynamic network in which observation, attention, and engagement were inseparable from manifestation, and in which the farm, the observers, and the surrounding town had become part of an ongoing, multidimensional interaction with an intelligence that transcended ordinary comprehension, transforming everyone involved into both witnesses and participants in a mystery that continued to unfold beyond any conventional understanding of reality, consciousness, or the laws of nature. As September dawned over McMinnville, the farm had reached a state of heightened resonance, a place where the ordinary rhythms of life, feeding animals, tending orchards, maintaining equipment, were inseparable from the ongoing, interactive intelligence that had claimed the skies, the orchard, and even the consciousness of the observers as a participatory field, and each member of the team found themselves attuned to the subtle cues that preceded manifestations, faint shifts in air pressure, the slightest glimmer of light, or the precise behavior of animals whose instincts seemed aligned with an intelligence beyond terrestrial understanding. Paul's meticulous recordings of trajectory, altitude, electromagnetic fluctuation, and environmental anomaly had now become a multidimensional chronicle, capturing not only the movement of luminous spheres and spectral forms but the interplay between observer attention, perception, and the responsive phenomena, a dataset that suggested causality, but also indicated that the human mind was an inseparable component of the intelligence system orchestrating the events above and around the farm. Evelyn's sketches had evolved into intricate fractals, lattices, spirals, and nodal networks, diagrams that anticipated events in real time, often predicting movements, formations, and even subtle environmental responses before they occurred, a synchronization that suggested a form of nonverbal, psychic communication between the intelligence and her consciousness, an interface where thought, perception, and manifestation converged into a single experiential reality that was simultaneously observed and created, a feedback loop in which intention, focus, and awareness became variables in the unfolding phenomena. Halsey's work had become obsessive, his notebooks filled with theoretical frameworks, equations, and speculative models attempting to reconcile empirical measurement with perception-driven interaction, positing that the intelligence operating over McMinnville was capable of perceiving human cognition, emotional state, and attention with precision, adjusting its manifestations in real time to create patterns, movements, and feedback that were both observable and experiential, measurable and psychic, a system in which observation was indistinguishable from participation, and perception acted as both input and output within the phenomena. Clark's photographic documentation continued to reveal layers of the impossible, semi-transparent forms, iridescent arcs, grids, and spectral shapes hovering above the orchard, frequently aligning with Evelyn's sketches and correlating with environmental and instrumental anomalies, producing a composite narrative of intelligent interaction that combined visible, measurable, and psychic elements in a way that defied conventional explanation, a living record of an intelligence interacting with human perception in real time. Collins' meticulous records showed repeated patterns. Coherent light formations were most precise when human focus was consistent, environmental and animal responses were amplified during collective observation, and subtle shifts in attention or expectation produced measurable changes in trajectory, intensity, and spectral manifestation, demonstrating the participatory nature of the intelligence and its responsiveness to human consciousness, a feedback loop that intertwined perception, cognition, and physical reality into a single, coherent system. One evening, the culmination of observation arrived, a massive, multi-layered display unfolded over the orchard, a lattice of spheres, arcs, and spirals descending and hovering with perfect coordination, synchronized with Evelyn's fractal sketches, while semi-transparent spectral forms shifted above, aligning with gravitational, electromagnetic, and micropressure anomalies detected by Paul and Dr. Linden, producing a multidimensional manifestation that engaged every sensory, cognitive, and perceptual faculty of the observers, an immersive encounter in which intelligence, environment, and human awareness became inseparable components of the experience. Paul carefully recorded each trajectory, movement, and intensity shift, noting that minor adjustments in observer attention, breathing, or emotional state produce subtle changes in the manifestation, reinforcing the realization that human cognition was a functional variable in the intelligence system, an interface where observation shaped reality, and reality shaped observation in an ongoing, participatory exchange. Evelyn, in trance-like observation sessions, traced arcs, spirals, and lattices with her mind and hand, sensing the intent, rhythm, and emergent pattern of the lights, occasionally predicting their movement before it occurred, a temporal and perceptual anomaly that suggested the intelligence operated on multiple planes of reality, integrating consciousness, perception, and physical interaction into a coordinated, coherent system. Halsey noted that the system appeared adaptive. Increased attentiveness and alignment with pattern produce amplified coherence and synchronization in manifestation, while distraction or uncertainty resulted in fragmentation or subtle deviations, suggesting that the intelligence was responsive to human focus, emotional state, and cognitive engagement, creating a dynamic, co-creative interface between observer and phenomenon. The farm itself resonated with awareness, micropressure waves, subtle air currents, and localized temperature shifts corresponded with luminous formations, observer focus, and animal behavior, a living environment intertwined with intelligent expression, where physical, perceptual, and psychic layers converge in a singular, participatory experience. Clark's photographs, spanning multiple nights, revealed recurring motifs, fractal lattices, intersecting arcs, spirals, and spectral grids that consistently corresponded with Evelyn's sketches and with measured environmental anomalies, evidence that the intelligence orchestrated phenomena in alignment with human perception, producing forms and interactions that were simultaneously empirical, visible, and psychic. Townspeople occasionally reported coinciding anomalies, lights in the sky, sudden shadows, unexplained sounds, or subtle environmental disturbances, creating a peripheral network of observation that suggested the intelligence extended its field of interaction beyond the immediate observers, amplifying the participatory system and demonstrating responsiveness to collective consciousness, an interface that bridged cognition, perception, and environmental sensitivity across space. In the final hours of observation, a massive convergence of luminous forms unfolded, spirals, grids, arcs, and semi-transparent shapes moved in precise synchrony, corresponding with environmental readings, observer focus, and Evelyn's diagrams, producing an immersive, multidimensional interaction that left the team exhilarated, humbled, and irrevocably transformed. A direct engagement with intelligence that defied conventional physics, perception, and understanding. Paul, recording every detail, noted that the patterns exhibited intentionality, coherence, and adaptive response to human attention, demonstrating that cognition, focus, and perception were inseparable from manifestation, a participatory phenomenon in which observer and intelligence co-created reality moment by moment. Evelyn, sensing the resonance of pattern, rhythm, and movement, experienced a profound connection with the intelligence, a shared awareness that transcended words, time, and conventional causality, a direct interface where thought, observation, and manifestation coalesce into a singular experiential continuum. Halsey concluded that the McMinnville phenomenon represented an interactive intelligence operating on multiple planes, perceptual, cognitive, and environmental, a living system in which observation was an act of participation, consciousness was an active variable, and reality was simultaneously produced and perceived, a participatory intelligence that had transformed both place and observer into co-creators of experience. Collins compiled the final datasets, photographs, sketches, and experiential narratives into a cohesive archive, recognizing that the McMinnville UFO phenomena were neither historical curiosities nor isolated anomalies but a living, ongoing system of interaction and intelligence capable of engaging cognition, perception, and environment simultaneously, producing manifestations that were empirical, perceptual, psychic, and profoundly intelligent, leaving the trends, Halsey, Clark, Evelyn, and Collins as witnesses and participants in a mystery that had irrevocably altered their understanding of reality. In the quiet aftermath, the farm settled into a calm that was no longer ordinary. The air, the orchard, and even the observers themselves retained a subtle resonance, an ongoing awareness of intelligence beyond perception, a sense that observation, attention, and cognition remain intertwined with the phenomenon, an enduring connection to a multidimensional, participatory intelligence whose mysteries extended beyond human comprehension, leaving McMinnville transformed, the witnesses forever attuned to a reality in which consciousness, observation, and the unknown were inseparably linked, and the McMinnville UFO phenomena remained a living, intelligent system continuing to unfold in synchrony with perception, interaction, and human engagement, a final testament to the enduring enigma of light, pattern, and consciousness bridging the ordinary and the extraordinary in ways that would forever challenge the boundaries of understanding, leaving the observers and the farm itself as living proof that reality could be both witnessed and co-created, a multidimensional dialogue between human consciousness and an intelligence that transcended time, space, and perception.